Anthony Romano stood over his nephew's wheelchair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're finished, Vincent," he said quietly, almost gently, like a man closing a coffin lid. "A king who can't stand isn't a king. He's a burden." Then he turned and walked away from the man he had secretly ordered to be shot 6 months earlier. The man who trusted him with his life. The man who called him family. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel right now, hit the notification bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. The morning they brought Amelia Carter to the Romano estate, it was raining. Not a soft rain, not the kind that washes things clean and makes people feel poetic. It was the kind of rain that hits sideways and soaks through your coat before you've even made it from the car to the front door. The kind of rain that makes you question every decision that led you to this particular moment, standing outside a mansion that looked more like a fortress, holding a duffel bag full of medical supplies, one hand and a half-eaten granola bar in the other. Amelia was 29 minutes late. She knew this because the man who had hired her, a thin, nervous little assistant named Gerald, who sweated through his collar even on cold days, had called her 4 times during the drive to remind her. 17 minutes apart, each one more desperate than the last. "Miss Carter," Mr. Romano expects punctuality. "Miss Carter, I cannot stress enough how important it is that you arrive on time. Miss Carter, are you still on the road? Please tell me you're still on the road. Miss Carter, I'm begging you." She had tried to explain about the car, her 2009 Honda Civic, which she had named Doris because it had the temperament of a stubborn old woman, had decided to stall at a red light on Michigan Avenue. Just stopped, right there, in the middle of morning traffic. Doris had been doing this more frequently over the past few weeks, and Amelia had been meaning to take her to the mechanic, but mechanics cost money, and money was something Amelia Carter did not currently have in great abundance. She had managed to get Doris running again after 12 minutes of coaxing, 3 calls to her best friend Dana, who knew nothing about cars, but was very good at emotional support, and one very undignified moment where she had to ask a man in an expensive suit to help her push the car to the side of the road while she figured out the problem. The expensive suited man had looked at her like she was something unpleasant he had stepped on. She had thanked him anyway, because that was who Amelia Carter was. So she arrived at the Romano estate 29 minutes late, soaking wet, with granola crumbs on her jacket and a duffel bag that was, admittedly, slightly larger than necessary for a nursing job. But she believed in being prepared. The bag contained bandages, medication, 3 different kinds of pain relief cream, 2 bottles of water, 4 protein bars, a paperback novel she would probably never have time to read, a small cactus she was transporting to her sister's apartment, and she realized only now, reaching the front door, absolutely no umbrella. The man who opened the front door was not Gerald. He was enormous, well over 6 feet, with the kind of shoulders that suggested he had been specifically constructed for the purpose of standing in front of doors and making people reconsider their life choices. He looked at Amelia with an expression that could accurately be described as contained disbelief. "Miss Carter," he said. "That's me," she said, because there was nothing else useful to say. He looked at her bag, then at the cactus, which was poking out of the top of the bag at a slight angle. Then back at her face. "Mr. Romano is waiting," he said, and stepped aside. The inside of the Romano estate was not what Amelia had expected, which was interesting because she had expected quite a lot. Gerald had given her a briefing during one of their many phone conversations. The estate was large. The estate was impressive. The estate had security protocols and staff protocols and protocols about the protocols, all of which Amelia had listened to carefully and then partially forgotten because Doris had chosen that moment to make a concerning rattling sound. But impressive didn't quite capture it. The entryway alone was larger than the entire apartment Amelia shared with her younger sister. The floors were marble. The staircase that curved upward to the second floor looked like something from a movie set. There were flowers, fresh ones, arranged with the kind of precision that suggested someone was paid specifically to think about flower arrangements. Everything was beautiful. Everything was also completely silent. Not peaceful silent, not the comfortable silence of a house where people were simply going about their day. This was the other kind of silence, the kind that exists in places where people have learned that making noise has consequences. 3 staff members passed through the entryway while Amelia stood there dripping on the marble floor. None of them made eye contact with each other. None of them spoke. They moved with the careful, controlled efficiency of people performing choreography they had practiced until it became instinct. Amelia had worked in a lot of difficult households over the past 7 years of her caregiving career. She had worked with difficult patients, people who were in pain, people who were frightened, people who expressed both of those things through anger because that was easier than admitting the truth. She had developed what her mother called a read, the ability to walk into a room and immediately understand what kind of difficult she was dealing with. She read this house in about 30 seconds. This was not the difficult of pain or fear. This was the difficult of power. Specifically, power that had been injured and had not yet figured out what to do about that. Gerald appeared from a doorway to the left, looking exactly as she had imagined, thin, slightly damp with nervous energy, wearing a suit that fit perfectly, but somehow still looked uncomfortable on him. "Miss Carter," he said, and then stopped, apparently taking in her overall appearance, the wet hair, the granola crumbs, the cactus, and briefly losing his train of thought. "I know," Amelia said pleasantly. "I'm wet. I'll dry. Can you show me where Mr. Romano is?" "He's in the main sitting room. I need to prepare you." "I've been prepared," Amelia said. "Paralysis from a spinal cord injury. Incomplete injury at the T6 level. He has sensation but limited motor function below mid-chest. He's been in the wheelchair for 6 months. Previous caregivers have left due to," she paused, consulting her memory of Gerald's briefing, "difficult patient behavior." Gerald blinked. "That's accurate. Good. Let's go." "Miss Carter, I really need to emphasize—"
"Gerald."
She smiled at him, and it was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "I've taken care of a retired mob accountant who threw a bedpan at my head on my first day. I've taken care of a 93-year-old woman who spent 3 weeks convinced I was a Russian spy and hid her medication in her mattress to avoid taking it. I've taken care of a retired professional boxer who was twice my size and spent our first week together testing every boundary I set, one by one, to see what I was made of." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I'm not easy to scare. Let's go meet Mr. Romano." Gerald looked at her for a moment with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he turned and led her down the hallway. The door to the main sitting room was closed. Gerald knocked twice and then opened it without waiting for an answer, which told Amelia something about the established dynamics of this household. She followed him in. Vincent Romano was exactly where she expected him to be, positioned near the large window on the far side of the room, his wheelchair angled so that his back was partially toward the door. It was a deliberate positioning. She recognized it immediately, the refusal to appear to be waiting, the insistence on controlling the geometry of every interaction, even this one. She had time to register a few things in quick succession. He was younger than she had expected. The briefing had said 41, but something about the way his profile cut against the gray light from the window made him look both older and younger, simultaneously aged by what had happened to him, but with a quality underneath that was almost boyish in its intensity. His shoulders were exceptional. Even seated, even after 6 months of limited activity, the breadth of them spoke to what he must have been before. She filed that away as useful information for physical therapy. His hands, resting on the armrests of the wheelchair, were completely still. That was the thing she noticed most. Completely, deliberately still. Like a man who had learned to control the one part of himself that he could still control. He didn't turn around when they entered. "Romano," Gerald said quietly. "Miss Carter is here." Nothing. Amelia waited exactly 3 seconds, decided that was sufficient, and walked across the room to stand in his field of vision. He looked at her. She looked back. His eyes were dark, very dark, and they held the particular quality she had seen before in people who had survived something catastrophic, a flatness that wasn't emptiness exactly, but was more like a door that had been closed and barricaded from the inside. "You're late," he said. His voice was low.
"Control."
"The kind of control that takes years to develop." 29 minutes, she agreed. "My car stalled. I'd apologize, but you wouldn't believe it was sincere, so I'll just tell you it won't happen again if you have someone look at my car." Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A fraction. "You'd like me to fix your car," he said. It wasn't a question. It was the tone of a man who had just heard something he wasn't sure was real. "I'd like Doris to stop stalling on Michigan Avenue during rush hour," Amelia said. "Whether that involves you or a mechanic is really a logistical question." Gerald made a sound behind her that might have been a suppressed cough or might have been the beginning of a cardiac event. "Doris," Vincent repeated. "You named your car. She has a personality." It seemed rude not to. The silence that followed this exchange was different from the silence of the hallway. It was the silence of a man recalibrating. Vincent looked at her for a long moment. His gaze traveled over her, not the way powerful men looked at women, with assessment or possession, but with the specific attention of someone who was trying to figure out exactly what he was dealing with. The last caregiver lasted 4 days, he said. I know, Amelia said. Gerald told me. He also told me about the one before that 11 days and the one before that 6 hours. She tilted her head slightly. What did you say to the 6-hour one? I'm curious because 6 hours is impressively fast. Another shift, this one more visible. She touched my face without asking, he said, to adjust my collar. Nodded slowly. So, physical autonomy matters. That's completely reasonable. I always ask before I touch, and I don't adjust people's collars unless they ask me to because that's not my job. She set her bag down on the coffee table, which was probably not the done thing in this room, based on the way Gerald made the cardiac event sound again and started unzipping it. Can I ask you something before we get into the medical assessment? Vincent's eyes tracked to the bag, to the cactus, back to her face. You're going to ask regardless, he said. True, she admitted. When's the last time you did your physical therapy exercises? The temperature in the room dropped approximately 5 degrees. That, Vincent said quietly, is not your concern. It is actually. It's literally my primary concern. She pulled out her medical kit, professionally organized inside the chaos of the bag. Your injury level means you have real rehabilitation potential. Not walking, I'm not going to lie to you about that, but significantly improved trunk stability, upper body function, and potentially some return of partial sensation in your lower extremities with consistent therapy. But only with consistent therapy. She looked at him directly. So when was the last time? He said nothing. I'll interpret silence as a while, she said pleasantly. Miss Carter. His voice carried the specific edge of a man who was not accustomed to people continuing to speak after he had communicated without words that they should stop. I was told you were here to provide care, medical care, not to instruct me on what I should or should not do with my own body. Yes and no, Amelia said. I'm here to support your health and recovery. That includes medical care, but it also includes making sure you're actually doing the things that will help you recover, which means occasionally telling you things you don't particularly want to hear. She found what she was looking for in the medical kit and looked up. You hired a caregiver, Mr. Romano. A real one. Not someone who's going to stand here and tell you everything is fine when it isn't. Something in the room changed. She didn't have time to identify exactly what it was, because the door to the sitting room opened without a knock, and a man walked in who was clearly not staff, and clearly not expected, or rather, clearly expected to be able to walk in whenever he wanted to. He was in his mid-60s, with the broad build of a man who had been powerful in his youth and had softened only slightly with age. He had Vincent's coloring, but not Vincent's stillness. He moved like a man who owned every room he entered. He looked at Amelia with a kind of amused contempt that she recognized immediately and instinctively disliked. This is the new nurse, he said, directing the question Gerald, rather than at Amelia herself, as if she were furniture. Caregiver, Amelia said. There's a distinction. And you are? The man looked at her, then really looked. With surprise and then something colder. Anthony Romano, he said, Vincent's uncle, Mr. Romano, she said pleasantly. I'm in the middle of an intake assessment with my patient. If you need to speak with him, I'd appreciate it if you could give us about 40 minutes to finish. The silence that followed this was the loudest silence Amelia had ever created, and she had created some impressive ones over the years. Anthony Romano looked at her for a very long moment. Then he looked at Vincent. Vincent, she noticed, was watching his uncle with an expression that was carefully neutral, but held something underneath, something alert and watchful and very old. I'll come back, Anthony toned that suggested the words meant something other than what they appeared to mean. He glanced once more at Amelia with that cold amusement, and then he left. The door closed. Amelia turned back to Vincent and found him looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. You should know, he said quietly, that most people in this house do not speak to my uncle that way. Most people in this house, Amelia said, picking up her blood pressure cuff, are not his nephew's caregiver. May I? She held up the cuff. A pause. Yes, he said. She came around to his left side and began attaching the cuff to his arm. Up close, the stillness she had noticed from across the room was even more striking. He held himself with a control that was almost architectural, like a building that had learned to endure weight by distributing it differently. How long has he been coming here? She asked, keeping her voice conversational as she pumped the cuff. He visits regularly, Vincent said. That's not what I asked. Another of those recalibrating silences. More frequently since my injury, he said finally. She read the gauge, released the cuff. Your blood pressure is elevated. Not dangerously, but more than I'd like. I want to check it again in an hour. She made a note. Are you sleeping adequately? That means no. She moved to his right side. Pain level? Scale of 1 to 10. 4 consistently varies. She stopped and looked at him directly. Mr. Romano, I'm going to be honest with you, and I need you to be honest with me. Not because I'm going to judge you, and not because it will change how I do my job, but because I can't actually help you if you tell me everything is fine when it isn't. So I'll ask again, pain level. He looked at her for a long moment. 6, he said, sometimes 7. She nodded. Thank you. That's what I needed. She wrote it down. We're going to talk about your pain management regimen, because 6 to 7 consistently means we're not managing it well enough. She glanced up. Is the neurological burning at night the worst of it? Something crossed his face, surprise, quickly controlled, that she had known to ask about the neuropathic pain specifically. Yes, he said. We can do better than what you're currently on for that. I'll talk to your physician. She tucked the notepad away and straightened, and at that precise moment, because Amelia's relationship with timing had always been complicated, she reached for her bag to put the notepad away, and somehow, in a sequence of events she would struggle to fully reconstruct later, managed to catch the handle of the coffee carafe that was sitting on the small table beside the wheelchair. The carafe tipped. Still warm splashed across the front of Vincent Romano's extremely expensive white shirt. The room stopped. Every molecule of air in the space seemed to freeze in place. Amelia looked at the coffee. She looked at Vincent's shirt. She looked at his face. He was looking down at his shirt with an expression of absolute stillness. Behind her, she could hear Gerald's breathing become slightly audible. I am so sorry, Amelia said immediately, and she meant it completely, because she had just covered her new client, a Mafia boss who had caused 3 grown adults to quit within days with hot coffee on her first day. That was completely my fault. I should have, here, let me. She had already pulled a clean cloth from her bag and was carefully blotting the coffee before she registered that she had not asked. Stopped. May I, she said. To Blotto, I just. Continue, he said. His voice was strange. She couldn't identify what was strange about it at first as she carefully blotted the coffee from the fine white fabric, and then she looked up and saw his face and understood. He wasn't angry. He wasn't performing the absence of anger or controlling anger into stillness. He genuinely wasn't angry. He was looking at her with something she could only describe as bewilderment, the expression of a man encountering something he doesn't have a category for. You're not afraid of me, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't quite a question. It was the tone of a man stating something that had just become newly real to him. Amelia sat back slightly and looked at him directly. Should I be? He looked at her for a long moment. Everyone who works in this house is afraid of me. I'm sure they have their reasons, she said, but you're my patient. Being afraid of my patient doesn't make me a better caregiver. It makes me a worse one. She went back to the coffee stain, which was proving persistent. Besides, you poured coffee on me first.
Metaphorically.
I don't know what that means, he said. It means you were cold and difficult when I walked in here, and I stayed anyway. She glanced up. So we've both been a little difficult. Seems fair. He was quiet for a long moment. My shirt, he said finally, looking down at it again, is ruined, she confirmed. I'll replace it. She paused. Actually, I can't afford to replace it, which is unfortunate because I'm guessing this cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But I'll find a way to. Yes, stop talking. A pause. The shirt doesn't matter, he said. She looked up at him. His face was unreadable again, back behind whatever barriers he maintained by default. But something was different. Something had shifted during the past 40 minutes that she could feel but not quite name. Mr. Romano, she said, because she believed in saying things directly, I want to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it rather than just waiting for me to finish so you can dismiss it. He waited. You have a real chance at significant recovery, she said. Not a complete recovery. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending there's a version of this where everything goes back to the way it was. But real recovery. Meaningful recovery. The kind that changes what your daily life looks like. She held his gaze. But it's going to require you to stop treating your body like it's already given up. And it's going to require you to stop treating everyone around you like they're either enemies or obstacles. Because both of those things are making you worse. She paused. That's my honest assessment on day 1. I'll understand if you'd like me to leave. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. Somewhere in the house, a door closed. Vincent Romano looked at Amelia Carter with those dark, complicated eyes for what felt like a very long time. You have granola on your jacket, he said finally. She looked down. He was right. I had a granola bar in the car. There is a kitchen staff of 7 people in this house, he said. You don't need to bring your own food. Good to know. Another silence, but this one was somehow different from all the previous ones. It had a different texture, not the silence of a person refusing to engage. Something closer to the silence of a person deciding something. The physical therapy, he said. What specifically would it involve? And there it was. Amelia didn't let herself smile. She had enough instinctive understanding of this man to know that a visible moment of victory would not go over well. But she felt it internally, a small warmth spreading through her chest. I'll explain the whole program, she said, pulling her notepad back out. It's going to be work, real work. And some days it's going to feel like there's no point to it. And on those days I'll remind you that there's a point to it. She looked at him steadily. I'm very good at reminding people of things they'd rather not hear. He looked at her for one more long moment. I believe you, he said. It was not a compliment, exactly. It was something closer to a statement of fact, the acknowledgement of one person by another, stripped of pretense and posturing. It was possibly the most honest thing anyone in this house had said to her since she arrived. She thought, sitting across from Vincent Romano in his quiet, immaculate, deeply unhappy sitting room, that this was going to be the most complicated case she had ever taken. She also thought, in the part of her mind that she didn't always listen to but almost always should have, that she was going to stay. Not because of the money, although the money was substantially better than her previous cases, and Doris was not going to fix herself. Not because of the challenge, although she never had been able to walk away from a difficult case, which was a character trait her mother called stubbornness, and her therapist called something more generous. She was going to stay because she had spent the past 40 minutes with a man who had clearly decided, somewhere in the past 6 months, that the most effective way to protect himself was to make sure no one could actually see him. And she had spent the past 40 minutes seeing him very clearly. He was wounded, not just physically, wounded in the way that happens when something you thought was solid, something you built your entire life on the foundation of, turns out to have been compromised from the inside. She didn't know yet what had done that to him. She would find out. She always found out eventually because she was very good at staying in rooms where people wanted her to leave. All right, she said, clicking her pen. Let's start with your current medication schedule and work from there. And then I'd like to hear about your daily routine, not what you used to do, what you actually do now, every day. She looked up and found him watching her with that expression she was beginning to recognize, the one that meant he was trying to place her in a category and failing. Every day, he said. I need to understand your baseline before I can help you change it. He was quiet for a moment, then slowly he began to talk. And Amelia Carter, 29 minutes late and still slightly damp from the rain, sat across from one of the most feared men in Chicago and listened. She listened in the way that she always listened, with her whole attention, without the layer of performance that most people brought to the act of listening, without the part of herself that was already preparing what to say next. She listened, and she heard, underneath the controlled words and the careful omissions and the practiced flatness of his voice, the sound of a man who had not been truly heard in a very long time. Maybe ever. Outside, the rain continued. Inside the Romano estate, something small and almost imperceptible had changed. Not the heavy silence that had greeted her at the door. Something newer. Something that had not been there before she arrived. The faintest possible beginning of something that might, if handled carefully and given time, grow into trust. Amelia didn't mention it, but she noticed it. She always noticed the things that other people were too hurried or too frightened to see. 3 floors above the sitting room, in an office that faced the front drive, Anthony Romano watched the rain hit the windows and thought about timing. He thought about how long a man could be weakened before the weakness became permanent. He thought about how much longer he would need to wait. And he thought about the woman who had just arrived in a beaten-up car with a cactus in her bag and walked into his nephew's sitting room like she owned the floor beneath her feet. She was a complication. He hadn't decided yet what kind. But Anthony Romano had not gotten to where he was by ignoring complications. He picked up his phone and made a call. Find out everything about Amelia Carter, he said. Where she came from, who she knows, whether she can be bought. He paused. And whether she can be removed. He hung up and went back to watching the rain. Below him in the sitting room, the sound of conversation had started. That was new. Vincent hadn't allowed conversation in that room since the attack. Anthony filed that away and said nothing to no one because he was very good at knowing which information was too valuable to share. He thought about his nephew's wheelchair. He thought about how much easier the next step would be if the people around Vincent believed in his recovery. Let the caregiver do her work, he thought. Let her build his hope back up. It would make everything that came next so much more effective. He smiled slightly to himself in the dark glass of the window. And below him, completely unaware of any of this, Amelia Carter was asking Vincent Romano what his favorite meal was before the accident, because she believed that understanding what a person had lost was the first step toward helping them reclaim what they still had. And Vincent Romano, who had not answered a question about himself, honestly, in longer than he could remember, opened his mouth and answered. The next morning came fast and cold. Amelia had been given a room on the second floor, a room that was larger than any space she had ever slept in, with a bed so expensive it felt wrong to lie down on it with her regular person body. She had lain awake for 2 hours staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of the Romano estate settle around her like something alive before finally falling into the shallow, alert sleep of a person who knows instinctively that the place they are in requires them to stay partially awake. She was up at 5:30, not because anyone had told her to be, because she had learned, across 7 years of difficult cases, that the first full day was always the one that set the tone for everything that came after. And she needed the tone of this particular situation to be set correctly. She found the kitchen at 5:45, which involved one wrong turn into what appeared to be a room that existed solely to store expensive wine, and one correct turn that she achieved by following the smell of coffee. The kitchen was enormous and already occupied by 2 staff members who looked at her with the careful blankness she was beginning to recognize as the default expression of everyone who worked inside these walls. "Good morning," she said. They nodded. "I'm Amelia. I'll be Mr. Romano's caregiver." She looked around. "Is the coffee ready?" One of them, a woman in her 40s with efficient hands and a face that had clearly decided years ago to give nothing away, poured her a cup without being asked. "Thank you," Amelia said. "What's your name?" A pause that lasted just slightly too long. "Rosa." "Good. I'm going to need to know what Mr. Romano actually eats versus what he's supposed to eat, because those two things are almost never the same in my experience, and the gap between them is usually where the real problems live." Rosa looked at her for a moment. Something shifted very slightly behind her careful expression. "He doesn't eat much," Rosa said. "In the mornings, almost nothing. He used to eat before." Amelia nodded slowly. "Before the injury. Before everything changed." The way Rosa said it quietly, with a weight underneath the words that suggested she meant more than she was saying, made Amelia set down her coffee cup and pay closer attention. "Rosa," she said, keeping her voice even and conversational, "how long have you worked here?" 11 years. "And how long has Mr. Romano's uncle been coming to the estate more frequently?" The shift in Rosa's expression this time was more visible. Not fear exactly. Something more like the recognition of a question she had been waiting for someone to ask. "Since the accident," Rosa said carefully. "The accident," Amelia repeated. Rosa said nothing else, but she held Amelia's gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was necessary before turning back to the counter, which was, Amelia understood, about as loud as a declaration as Rosa was prepared to make inside these walls. Amelia picked up her coffee cup and filed everything away. She was still thinking about it 20 minutes later when she knocked on the door of Vincent's private suite, because she had reviewed his medical file the previous night and discovered that his listed morning routine included medication at 6 a, that based on his pain levels he had almost certainly been skipping. "Come in," he said from somewhere on the other side of the door. She opened it. He was already awake, had been for a while, she could tell, because his eyes had the specific exhausted quality of a person who had spent several hours not sleeping rather than the foggy quality of someone recently disturbed. He was in the wheelchair, positioned near the window again, wearing a dark shirt that fit him precisely, and holding a phone he wasn't looking at. 6 a.m., he said, without looking up from the phone he wasn't looking at. "Your medication schedule says 6. She agreed, setting her bag down and pulling out his morning medications, which she had organized the previous night. "You haven't been taking the gabapentin in the mornings." He looked at her then. "How do you know that?" "Because your pain levels last night were a 7. And if you'd been taking it consistently, your pain levels wouldn't be a 7. She held out the medication and a glass of water she had brought from the kitchen. "That's why you stopped." A pause. "It affects my thinking." "It affects your thinking less than a pain level of 7 does," she said. "Trust me, we'll adjust the dose downward and see if we can find the level that manages the pain without clouding you." She kept her hand extended, steady. "But you have to actually take it for that to work." He looked at her hand. at her face. Then he took it. She didn't make a thing of it, just moved to the chair across from him and opened her notepad. How did you sleep? Poorly. The neuropathic burning again? Yes. I called your physician last night, Dr. Kaplan. She looked up. He was surprised I called at 9 p.m. Most people don't call physicians at 9 p.m., Vincent said. Most people's patients aren't in unnecessary pain because their medication protocol hasn't updated in forms. She shrugged. He's reviewing the protocol. We should have an updated plan by end of week. She paused. He also told me you haven't attended your last 3 telehealth appointments. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a person who has been caught in something they thought no one was paying attention to. They weren't productive, Vincent said. What made them unproductive? The doctor spoke to me like I was an invalid. And what would productive look like? He looked at her sharply, like the question had surprised him. Someone who speaks to me like I'm still capable of making decisions about my own body. That's completely reasonable, Amelia said, writing it down. I'll make a note for Dr. Kaplan. He needs to understand that you're not a passive patient. You need to be included in every decision about your care. If he can't work with that, we find someone who can. She looked up. You should have said that to someone months ago. There was no one to say it to. The words came out flat, factual. But they landed in the room with a weight that neither of them acknowledged directly, because acknowledging it directly would have required the kind of honesty that this early in the morning felt too exposed for. Amelia moved on. She was good at moving on at exactly the right moment. Physical therapy starts today, she said. After breakfast, which you are going to eat. Don't argue about breakfast. I wasn't going to argue about breakfast. You were about to, I could see it. She closed her notepad. Rosa is making eggs. Do you have a preference? Something crossed his face, the faintest trace of an expression she couldn't quite categorize. You spoke to Rosa this morning. She's been here 11 years, which means she knows your actual preferences as opposed to your official ones, which is very useful information for me. She stood. Preference. A long pause. Scrambled, he said. Not dry. Good, 20 minutes. She was at the door when he spoke again. Miss Carter, she turned. He was looking at her with that expression again, the one that said he was encountering something he didn't have a system for handling. Why did you call Kaplan at 9 p.m.? She considered the question. Because I read your file, and I was angry that no one had updated your pain protocol in 4 months. And when I'm angry about something, I tend to address it immediately, rather than waiting until it's a more convenient time. He stared at her. You were angry on my behalf. Is that strange? Yes, he said simply. No one in this house gets angry on my behalf. They get afraid. Or they get careful. He paused. Angry is different. Anger means I think you deserve better than what you're getting, she said. Which I do. She opened the door. 20 minutes. Don't let the medication make you think you can skip breakfast. It won't work on an empty stomach. She left before he could respond. In the hallway, she allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of leaning against the wall with her eyes closed, because the sustained effort of being completely calm and competent in that room was more work than it looked. Then she straightened up and went back to the kitchen. Rosa was already making eggs. Neither of them said anything about the fact that Rosa had started making them before Amelia came back to ask. The physical therapy session happened at 9 a.m. in the large room on the ground floor that had been converted for the purpose. It had clearly been expensive to set up and clearly had not been used in weeks, based on the thin layer of inattention that had settled over the equipment. Amelia had reviewed the therapy program that Vincent's previous physical therapist had designed. It was technically adequate. It was also in her professional assessment, designed by someone who had decided Vincent Romano was a man to be managed rather than a man to be challenged. She had redesigned it the previous night. This is different from what Marcus had me doing, Vincent said, looking at the modified program she had printed out. Marcus was being cautious, Amelia said, which is appropriate for early acute recovery. You're 6 months out. We can be more aggressive. Aggressive. Productive. Pick whatever word is more comfortable. She positioned herself beside him. We're starting with trunk stability exercises. These are going to be boring. They're also the most important thing we do because your trunk stability determines everything else: your posture, your ability to transfer, your upper body strength. She paused. Ready? He looked at the exercise sheet, then at her. If I tell you this is pointless, I'll tell you it isn't and make you do it anyway. She met his eyes. We're going to have that argument approximately 3 times a week. I'll win every time. You might as well accept that now and save us both the energy. Something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. That's an extremely arrogant position. It's a realistic one. She adjusted the positioning of his chair. Now sit up straight and engage your core. We're going to hold for 10 seconds and release. 10 repetitions. He sat up straight. She corrected his positioning with 2 careful adjustments, asking before each one. He allowed them without comment. They began. He lasted 6 repetitions before his body began to shake with the effort, which was actually better than she had expected, and which she absolutely did not tell him because she had learned that telling people they were doing better than expected often caused them to stop trying as hard. 7, she said. I know how to count, he said through his teeth. Good. Then you know we need 3 more. He did 3 more. He was breathing harder than he would have liked when they finished. She could tell. The kind of breathing that a man like Vincent Romano would experience as humiliating the evidence of his own body's limitations, right there in the open. She moved immediately to the next exercise, giving him no time to sit in the humiliation. This was a technique she had developed over years. The fastest way past a difficult moment was always through it. Upper body circuit next, she said. This part you're going to be better at. Why? Because your upper body strength is actually very good considering how little you've been using it, which means you've been doing something. A pause, I use the parallel bars at night when no one is watching. Amelia stopped what she was doing and looked at him. You've been doing your own therapy, she said. He stopped. You didn't want anyone to see you struggle, she said. He said nothing, which was the same as saying yes. She looked at him for a long moment, and what she felt was not pity. She had learned years ago that pity was the least useful emotion you could bring to a patient, but something more like recognition. The recognition of a person who had been fighting alone in the dark for so long that they had forgotten there was another way to do it. The parallel bars, she said, show me your routine. Now. He looked at her for a moment. Then he moved his wheelchair to the parallel bars at the far end of the room. She followed at a distance, giving him space. What happened next she would remember for a long time. He transferred from the chair to the bars with the efficiency of someone who had practiced the movement hundreds of times alone. His arms took his weight, and she could see the tremor in them, could see the enormous effort it cost him, and she could also see the thing underneath the effort. The refusal, the absolute bone-deep refusal to accept that this was the end of what his body could do. He moved along the bars, 6 steps. His jaw was tight, his breathing controlled with the precise force of a man who had decided that showing pain was showing weakness, and she wanted to tell him that the two things were not the same, but this was not the moment for that particular conversation. 8 steps, he stopped, breathed, and then slowly, with enormous effort and something she could only describe as defiance directed at his own body, at the injury, at the fact of the wheelchair waiting behind him, he took a 10th step. Then he stopped. She crossed the room and moved the wheelchair to where he was, positioning it without comment, and he lowered himself back into it with the same practiced efficiency. They looked at each other. You've been doing that every night, she said. Most nights.
Yes.
She nodded slowly. She said, here's what's going to happen. You keep doing the nightly bar work, it's good for you. And clearly you're not going to stop. But we're modifying your approach because you're compensating on the left side in a way that's going to cause a shoulder problem if we don't address it. She pulled out her notepad. And you tell me about the nights when it goes badly, because sometimes it will go badly and you need to not be alone with that. He looked at her sharply. The nights when it goes badly? The nights when you try and your body won't cooperate and you end up back in the chair feeling like. She paused, choosing the word carefully, like it might not be worth continuing to try. The silence that followed that sentence was very long. That happens, he said finally. I know, she said. It happens to everyone who's going through what you're going through. And the fact that you keep getting back on those bars anyway. She met his eyes. That's not nothing, Vincent. That's actually extraordinary. It was the first time she had used his first name. Neither of them commented on it. But something in the room shifted again, and this shift was larger than the previous ones, and she could feel it the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm, not uncomfortable, but significant. She cleared her throat and looked at her notepad. All right. Shoulder compensation exercise. The door to the therapy room opened. Anthony Romano walked in. He did it the same way he had done everything she had observed him, duly someone to whom the concept of knocking was an interesting idea that applied to other people. I need to speak with my nephew, he said, looking at Amelia. We're in the middle of a therapy session, she said pleasantly. This won't take long. Mr. Romano, your nephew's physical therapy is scheduled for 90 minutes. We have 40 minutes remaining. I'm happy to let you know when we're. Miss Carter Anthony's voice had a quality that she imagined worked very well on most people, smooth, utterly certain of its own authority. carrying the faint suggestion of consequences for noncompliance. I don't think you understand how this household operates. I understand that my patient's health is my primary responsibility, she said, and that his therapy schedule is an important part of his recovery. She turned to Vincent. Would you like me to step out? It was deliberate, the direct question to Vincent in front of Anthony. The positioning of the decision with the person who actually had the right to make it. Vincent looked at his uncle. Something moved across his face. Something Amelia couldn't read completely, but which had the quality of a man performing a rapid and complicated internal calculation. We'll finish the session, Vincent said. The words landed. Anthony went very still. Vincent, 40 minutes. Anthony. His voice was quiet, completely controlled. We'll talk after. Anthony looked at his nephew for a long moment. Then he looked at Amelia, and the look he gave her was different from the amused contempt of the day before. This was something more focused. Something that, if she had been a different kind of person, would have frightened her. She held his gaze and smiled politely. He left. The door closed. Neither she nor Vincent said anything for a moment. Then thank you, he said. Quietly, you made the call, she said. I just asked the question. You knew asking it that way would force him to respect your decision in front of me? Yes. She looked at him steadily. You're the patient. This is your recovery. No one gets to override that. A pause. Not even family. He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his eyes, something complicated. Something she suspected had less to do with the therapy session and more to do with a much larger and older set of circumstances that she was only just beginning to understand the shape of. Left shoulder, he said finally. You said I was compensating. She blinked. Then right, yes. And they went back to work. But something was different now. The atmosphere in the room had changed. The careful, managed distance that Vincent had maintained since her arrival had shifted, not disappeared, not collapsed, but changed. Like a wall that had developed a door. The session ended at 10:30. Rosa brought lunch at noon, and Amelia ate in the small sitting room adjacent to Vincent's suite because he had not invited her to eat elsewhere, and she had decided that proximity mattered more than comfort in the early days of a case like this. She was halfway through a bowl of the best soup she had ever eaten in her life. She made a mental note to ask Rosa for the recipe, which she would absolutely never have the time or kitchen equipment to replicate when her phone rang. It was her sister Carrie. How is it? Carrie asked in the voice of someone who had been waiting to ask this question since approximately 6 p. the previous evening. Complicated, Amelia said. Is he terrible? Amelia thought about 10 steps on the parallel bars. About scrambled eggs, not dry. About the word poorly said at 6 in the morning with an exhaustion underneath it that had nothing to do with sleep. No, she said. He's not terrible, Amelia. Carrie's voice shifted into the specific register she used when she thought her sister was doing the thing. You've been there one day, I know. You always do this. You get it. I'm not attached. I'm observant. She put down her spoon. There's something going on in this house, Carrie. Something beyond the medical situation. And I haven't figured out what it is yet. Something like what? She thought about Rosa's face when she said before everything changed. She thought about the way Anthony Romano had looked at her when Vincent said 40 minutes. She thought about the careful, rehearsed blankness of every person who worked within these walls, and the particular kind of care they moved with, the way people moved who had learned that being noticed could have consequences. I don't know yet, she said. I'm fine. The soup is excellent. How's Doris? Doris is in a parking spot on your street doing absolutely nothing, which is the most reliable she's ever been. A pause. Are you sure you're okay? I'm sure, she said. I'll call you tomorrow. She hung up and sat with the soup for a moment, thinking. Then she stood, cleaned up after herself, which she suspected was not the done thing in this house, but which felt necessary to her sense of herself as a person, and went to check on her patient. She knocked on the door of his suite. Come in. He was at his desk. She hadn't seen him at his desk before. He was reading something, documents by the look of them, covered in numbers and dense text, and when she entered, he closed the folder with the specific smoothness of a person protecting information without appearing to protect information. She filed that away. Everything okay? She asked. Fine. Pain level 4. Better than this morning. Yes. She moved to the side table where his afternoon medication was staged. Your uncle? Does he visit every day? The pause was fractional. Not every day, but most days recently. Vincent looked at her steadily. You ask a lot of questions for a caregiver. I ask a lot of questions for anyone, she said. It's how I understand a situation. She met his gaze. And I need to understand this situation to do my job properly, which includes understanding the stress factors in your environment. Because stress directly affects recovery. My uncle is not a stress factor. The way he said it slightly too quickly, slightly too evenly, told her everything she needed to know about how true that was. Okay, she said mildly. Afternoon meds. And I want to check your blood pressure again. She sat across from him with the blood pressure cuff, and as she worked, the room settled into the quiet that she was beginning to recognize as their particular kind of quiet, not the hostile silence of their first meeting, not the careful silence of the house, but something more like the working silence of two people who were figuring out how to occupy the same space without requiring anything of each other that hadn't yet been offered. It was, she thought, the beginning of something. She didn't know what, but it was real. The documents, he said suddenly. She looked up. Yes, they're organizational accounts. The ones Anthony has been managing since my injury. He held her gaze. There are numbers that don't match. She was quiet for a moment. That concerns you. It concerned me enough that I spent this morning reviewing them when I should have been resting. A pause. You should know that what I just told you doesn't leave this room, she said. Obviously, he looked at her for a long moment. Why obviously? Because you're my patient, and what you tell me is confidential, and because whatever is happening with those accounts is your business, not mine. She finished with the blood pressure cuff. But I'll tell you this, the fact that you're reviewing them, that you're still engaged with your organization, that you care about what's happening. She looked at him directly. That's important. That's you still being present in your own life. Don't let anyone take that from you. Something crossed his face, something raw and quick that he controlled almost immediately, but not quite quickly enough. Gerald said the last caregiver told me I should focus on rest and recovery and leave the business concerns to the people around me, he said. The last caregiver was wrong, Amelia said flatly. Your life didn't stop when your mobility changed. Your responsibilities didn't stop. Your intelligence didn't stop. Anyone who tells you to just rest and leave everything to the people around you is, she paused, choosing the word carefully, not serving your best interests. He looked at her with an intensity that felt different from his earlier assessments, something more direct. Miss Carter, he said slowly, who sent you here? She blinked. Your assistant? You know this. Who recommended you to Gerald, the agency? Carter Caregiving Associates. I've been with them 6 years, she frowned. Why? He seemed to be working through something internally. Because in my experience, people who say exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment are usually saying it for a reason. She held his gaze and did not look away. I'm saying it because it's true. And because someone in this house needed to say it to you months ago. She stood. I'm not anyone's plant, Mr. Romano. I'm a caregiver who is very good at her job and who is currently quite annoyed that you've been in unnecessary pain for 4 months because no one was paying adequate attention. She picked up her bag. Dinner is at 7. Rosa knows what you like. I'll be back at 9 for your evening medication. Miss Carter to the door. She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she was starting to think she understood, not the blankness, not the calculation, but the thing underneath both of those. The thing that had been there since the coffee spill, and the question about his eggs, and the 10 steps on the parallel bars. Something that looked, if she had to name it, like a man slowly remembering what it felt like to be seen. The soup at lunch, he said. Did Rosa tell you it was my mother's recipe? She hadn't known that. Her face must have shown it, because something in his expression shifted softer somehow, in a way that made him look his actual age rather than the older, harder age that his circumstances had imposed on him. No, she said gently. She didn't tell me that. She made it on my first day home from the hospital, he said. She was the only one who he stopped. Started again. She made it that first day. Amelia stood in the doorway for a moment, holding all of that carefully. It was the best soup I've ever had, she said finally. He nodded once, looking back down at the desk. In the hallway, she stood still for a moment and let herself feel the weight of what was happening in that room, the enormous, slow, complicated work of a human being beginning to come back to themselves. And then she took a breath and walked toward the stairs. At the end of the hallway, Gerald was waiting. He had the look of a man who had something to tell her that he wasn't sure how to tell her. Miss Carter, he said quietly, I need you to be careful. She stopped. Careful about what? He glanced down the hallway. Both directions. Mr. Anthony Romano made some phone calls this afternoon. He lowered his voice further. He's been asking questions. About you. About your background. About your finances. She held very still. Why would he do that? Gerald looked at her with eyes that had seen a great deal in 11 years of working in this house and had learned to keep all of it very carefully contained. Because you did something today that no one has done in this house in 6 months, he said. You made Vincent Romano tell his uncle to wait. The words hung in the air between them. Gerald, she said slowly, how did Vincent end up in that wheelchair? Gerald looked at her. He looked down the hallway again, and he said nothing. But the way he said nothing, the specific quality of his silence, the way his jaw tightened, and his eyes went to the door at the far end of the hall, the door that led to the office where Anthony Romano spent his afternoons making phone calls, told her everything she needed to know about the direction in which the answer lived. She walked back to her room that evening, with her mind running fast and quiet, the way it did when she was working through a problem that mattered. She thought about Rose's face, about Gerald's warning, about numbers that didn't match in organizational accounts, about a man who had been shot 6 months ago and had spent the months since alone on parallel bars in the dark, about an uncle who smiled at his nephew like he was looking at something already buried. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed and opened her notepad to a clean page. At the top, she wrote a single question. She stared at it for a long time. Then she closed the notepad, turned off the light, and lay in the dark listening to the Romano estate settle around her, all its silences and secrets and careful performances, and told herself that tomorrow she would start finding answers. She had no way of knowing in that moment that the answers were already moving toward her, that somewhere in this house, a decision had already been made about Amelia Carter, that the most dangerous person she had ever been in a room with had already decided she was a problem, and that tomorrow he was going to start doing something about it. She found it at 2 in the morning, not because she had been looking, or rather, not only because she had been looking, she had been awake, because sleep in this house still came in fragments, the way it did in places where the silence had teeth. She had been sitting at the small desk in her room with her notepad open, writing down the things she had observed in the past 48 hours and arranging them in the way she always arranged difficult information, not in order of importance, but in order of the questions they generated. Rose's face when she said before everything changed. Gerald's warning in the hallway. The accounts with numbers that didn't match. Anthony Romano's phone calls. The specific quality of fear that lived inside this house, not the fear of an outside threat, but the fear of something internal, something close. She was staring at the notepad when she heard it. Footsteps below her, moving with the careful, deliberate quiet of someone who did not want to be heard. She sat very still and listened. The footsteps crossed below her, paused, and then continued, moving toward the east wing, away from the main living areas, away from Vincent's suite. She waited 3 minutes. Then she put on her shoes and followed. The east wing hallway was dark, and she moved through it with the careful quiet she had developed over years of working night shifts in homes where sound carried. She passed 3 closed doors before she saw the thin line of light under the 4th one, the room that Gerald had identified during her initial tour as a secondary office used for storage. The voice she heard through the door stopped her cold. It was Anthony Romano's voice, low, precise, and carrying the specific quality of a man giving instructions rather than having a conversation. The accounts are fine, he was saying. Romano doesn't understand what he's looking at. He never did. That was always his weakness. He trusted the numbers because he trusted me. The caregiver is a problem. She's asking questions. She's making him ask questions. Another pause, longer this time. I don't care how you do it. I want her gone by the end of the week. Make it look like she quit. Make it look like whatever you need to make it look like. But she leaves this house. Amelia stood in the dark hallway with her back against the wall and her heart beating in a way she was not accustomed to, not the fast beat of fear exactly, but something adjacent to it. The beat of a situation becoming real in a way that is different from knowing it intellectually. She had known something was wrong. She had not known it was this wrong. She moved back down the hallway with extreme care, retracing her steps to her room, and sat on the edge of the bed with her hands flat on her knees, breathing steadily through the process of deciding what to do next. She could leave. That was the simplest option. Pack the bag, collect the cactus, get in Doris, and drive away from a situation that was significantly more dangerous than anything she had signed up for. She thought about 10 steps on the parallel bars. She thought about scrambled eggs not dry, and a soup recipe that had been a mother's, and a man who said, "No one in this house gets angry on my behalf." She thought about numbers that didn't match in organizational accounts, and a shooting 6 months ago, and the way Anthony Romano had smiled at his nephew like he was looking at something already in the ground. She opened her notepad to the page where she had written the single question the night before. It said, "Who benefits from Vincent staying broken?" She looked at it for a long time. Then she turned to a new page and started writing everything she had just heard. word for word, because she had always had an excellent memory for spoken language, and because she understood, with a clarity that surprised her, that what she had just heard in that hallway was going to matter very much, very soon. She wrote until 4 a.m. Then she set her alarm for 5:30, put the notepad under her mattress, and lay down without expecting to sleep. She slept immediately and completely the way she always did when she had made a decision and committed to it. The decision was this: she was not leaving. Morning arrived gray and cold, and Amelia was in the kitchen at 5:45 as usual, and Rosa was already there as usual, and neither of them said anything unusual as Amelia poured her coffee and Rosa began preparing breakfast. But something was different, and they both knew it, and after 3 minutes of the careful, ordinary routine of the kitchen, Rosa put down what she was doing and spoke very quietly, without turning around. "He came in late last night," she said. "I know," Amelia said. Rosa turned then. She looked at Amelia's face for a moment. "How much do you know?" "Enough," Amelia said. "Maybe not everything." Rosa studied her for a long moment with those careful 11-year eyes. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron, took out a folded piece of paper, and placed it on the counter between them. "I've been keeping this for 2 years," Rosa said. "I didn't know who to give it to." Amelia unfolded it carefully. It was a handwritten list of dates. Next to each date, a name and a number. The numbers were large. The names meant nothing to her immediately, but the pattern was unmistakable: regular intervals, consistent amounts, documented in Rosa's small, precise handwriting. "What is this?" asked, although she was already beginning to understand. "Payments," Rosa said quietly. "Payments that Mr. Anthony authorized from household accounts that Mr. Vincent never reviewed because Mr. Vincent trusted his uncle completely." She paused. "I started noticing 2 years ago. Small amounts at first. Then larger." Her jaw was tight. "I didn't have proof of anything. I didn't know if I was understanding it correctly. And I was..." She stopped. "Afraid," Amelia said gently. "Terrified," Rosa said. "The men who work for Mr. Anthony are not gentlemen." Amelia folded the paper carefully and put it in her pocket. "Rosa, does anyone else in the house know about this?" "Gerald suspects," Rosa said. "He's never said so directly. But the way he watches, the way he's always watching, I think he suspects." Amelia nodded. "Okay, I need you to do something for me. I need you to act completely normally today. Can you do that?" Rosa looked at her steadily. "I've been acting completely normally for 2 years," she said. "I'm very good at it." Amelia looked at her, this woman who had spent 2 years carrying something heavy and frightening alone, who had waited for the right person to hand it to and felt a wave of something that had anger and admiration in equal measure. "You're very brave," she said. Rosa shook her head. "I'm very tired," she said. "There's a difference." She turned back to the stove. "Not dry, I know." Amelia took the medication tray and went to Vincent's suite. He was awake. He was always awake before she arrived, which she had stopped finding surprising and started finding meaningful. It was the habit of a man who had decided, somewhere in the process of his recovery, that he was not going to be caught still sleeping when the day started. A small act of control over his own circumstances. She knocked and entered, and she had approximately 5 seconds of looking at him before he read something in her face that made him put down the document he was holding and look at her directly. "What happened?" he said. She closed the door behind her. She pulled the chair close to the desk, closer than she usually sat, and she sat down and looked at him with the steady, direct gaze she used when there was no version of a conversation that wasn't difficult. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to hear all of it before you react." Something shifted in his face. Not fear. She had never seen fear on this man's face, and she did not see it now. Something more like the recognition of a moment that has been building for a long time finally arriving. "Tell me," he said. She told him all of it. The footsteps at 2A, the voice through the door, the instructions to have her removed, Rosa's paper, which she placed on the desk between them. She told him carefully and completely, without editorializing, without softening, without the instinct she occasionally had with patients to manage the delivery of difficult information. Because he was not a man who needed management. He was a man who needed the truth, delivered straight and trusted to handle it. She watched his face as she spoke. It was extraordinary what she watched happen. She had expected anger, the immediate, hot kind, the kind that burns through a person when they first hear something that reorders their entire understanding of their life. She had expected that, and she had prepared herself to hold space for it. What she saw instead was something much more complicated and much harder to watch. She saw a man understand something he had already known. Not the specifics, not the accounts, not the payments, not the precise shape of the betrayal, But the underlying truth, the thing that had been living in the edges of his awareness for months, the thing he had been refusing to look at directly, because looking at it directly would mean accepting that the attack that had put him in this wheelchair had not come from outside his life, but from inside it, from the man he had trusted most completely, from family. His face went through several things in rapid succession. She watched all of them, the realization, the confirmation of what some part of him had suspected, the grief underneath the realization, the anger that rose immediately to cover the grief, because grief was more exposed. And then something she did not expect. He picked up Rosa's paper from the desk. He looked at it for a long moment. And then he let out a long, slow breath. And when he looked up at her, his eyes were clear in a way they had not been clear before, not the flatness she had first seen, not the careful control, but a different kind of clarity. The clarity of a man who has been fighting in the dark and just had a light turned on. 2 years, he said quietly. At least 2 years of documented payments, she said. Rosa believes it started before that. Rosa. He said the name was something she couldn't quite identify. She's been here 11 years. She was waiting for someone to trust, Amelia said. She didn't know who was safe. He set the paper down. His hands, she noticed, were completely still. More still than usual, which she had not thought possible. The attack, he said. I think you already know, she said gently. I need to hear you say it. She held his gaze. The evidence points to someone inside your organization. Someone with access to your schedule, your security protocols, your movements. She paused. Someone who would benefit significantly from your incapacitation rather than your death, because your death would require a transition of power that could be contested. But your injury could be framed as a reason to consolidate power gradually, quietly, while everyone's attention was on your recovery. The silence that followed was the longest silence she had ever sat in with another person. Vincent Romano looked at the paper on his desk. He looked at his hands. He looked at Amelia. He came to the hospital every day, he said. While I was in the ICU, every single day he held my hand. He stopped. He cried. She said nothing because there was nothing to say to that. There was only the sitting with it, the particular devastation of a betrayal by someone who had performed love convincingly enough to be believed. Vincent, she said, after a moment, I need to ask you something important. He looked at her. Is there someone in your organization that you trust completely? Not Anthony, not anyone Anthony has brought into your circle in the past 2 years. Someone from before. Someone with their own loyalty to you. He was quiet for a moment. Marco Vitelli. Can you reach him without Anthony knowing? A pause. Yes, then we need to do that today, she said. Not tonight. Today. Before Anthony decides that removing me requires something more immediate than making it look like I quit. The words landed in the room and stayed there. He threatened you, Vincent said. His voice had changed. The controlled quality was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, something with heat in it, something that reminded her, suddenly and viscerally, of the man this man had been before the wheelchair. He gave instructions to someone, she said. I don't know who. I don't know what form the removal was supposed to take. She met his eyes steadily. I'm not telling you this to frighten you. I'm telling you because you need to know the full picture. You should leave, he said. The words were immediate and absolute. You should pack your things and leave this house today. And no, she said. He stared at her. Miss Carter, Amelia, she said. And no, I'm not leaving. She held his gaze with a directness that she could feel cost her something, not because she was afraid, but because she was being asked to be more visible than she usually allowed herself to be, more invested, more present in a situation that was beyond the boundaries of any professional caregiving relationship. I'm not leaving because you need me here. Not because you can't function without me. You've been functioning alone for 6 months and you know how to do that. But because whatever is about to happen in this house needs at least one person in it who isn't afraid of Anthony Romano. He looked at her for a very long moment. Why aren't you afraid of him? He asked. I'm afraid of plenty of things, she said. Doris dying on a highway. My sister making bad decisions. Letting someone down who needed me to stay. She paused. Anthony Romano doesn't make the list. He's a powerful man who is used to people being afraid of him, which means he's not prepared for people who aren't. She tilted her head slightly. Are you going to call Marco Vitelli? Or are we going to keep talking about my feelings? Something crossed his face that she hadn't seen before. It took her a moment to identify it because she had seen so many other things on that face, and this was new. He almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The ghost of it, moving across his features and disappearing before it fully formed, leaving behind something that changed the quality of the air in the room. He reached for his phone. She stood. I'll be in the hallway. Give me a sign when you're done. She stopped. Thank you, he said. Just that. Simply, without performance, without the managed quality of their earlier exchanges. Like a man who had gotten out of the habit of saying real things and was practicing getting back into it. She nodded once and went out into the hallway and closed the door behind her. And she stood with her back against the wall and breathed very carefully and deliberately, the way she had learned to breathe in difficult situations, and told herself that she was handling this and that she would continue to handle it. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. It said, "We know you found the accounts. Leave the house today." This is not a request. She stared at the text for a long moment. Then she screenshotted it and went back into Vincent's room. She showed him the phone without a word. His face went through several things in rapid succession, and none of them were subtle. And the one that settled was the one she had expected, not the ghost of a smile, but something much older and harder, and more fundamental to who he was. He took out his own phone and made a call. "Marco," he said when someone answered, "I need you at the estate today. Bring Reyes and Donovan." A pause, listening. "No, don't call ahead. Don't go through the main gate. Use the east access." "Yes, it's that serious." He hung up and looked at her. "They'll be here in 2 hours," he said. "Okay," she said. "What do you need from me in the meantime?" "Stay in this room," he said. It was not a request. It had the quality of something deeply meant, not the authority of a man accustomed to giving orders, but the authority of a man who had just understood that someone he did not want harmed was potentially in danger because of him. She considered arguing. She decided for once to let him have the control. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" He looked surprised. She sat down in the chair across from his desk. "But I want tea, and I want to use the time productively." She pulled out her notepad. "Talk me through the organizational structure. Who reports to Anthony directly? Who reports to you directly? And anyone who should report to you, but has been redirected to him in the past 6 months." He looked at her for a moment. Then he straightened in the wheelchair, that specific way he had of arranging himself that was about control and presence, and in the insistence on being fully himself in whatever space he occupied, and he began to talk. And she listened, and she wrote, and the two of them sat in that room while the clock moved, and the house went about its business around them. And somewhere in the East Wing, a man who had ordered his nephew shot made phone calls that were moving faster and more urgently now. And somewhere outside the estate, 3 men were getting in a car. Gerald came at 9 with tea, which told her that Gerald was paying attention in the way he always paid attention, quietly, completely, with the specific loyalty of a person who has watched something terrible happen and has been waiting for the moment when there is something he can actually do. He set the tea down and held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds. "The east gate will be unlocked," he said, and left. She looked at Vincent. He was looking at the door where Gerald had been. "How long?" he said quietly. "Has everyone in this house been trying to protect me?" "Since the beginning," she said. "They just didn't have anyone to do it with." He absorbed that. He looked at his hands. And then he looked at her with an expression that had nothing managed about it, nothing performed, nothing controlled, just a man looking at another person with the specific fullness of recognition that happens when you have been seen completely for the first time. "I've been treating them like servants," he said. "Yes, and they stayed anyway. Rosa has been keeping that paper for 2 years," she said, "waiting for the right person to trust." He was quiet for a long moment. "I have a lot to answer for," he said. It was not self-pity. It was the specific clarity of a man taking inventory. "You have time to answer for it," she said. "But first we get through today." The 2 hours moved in a way that felt simultaneously very fast and very long. Amelia drank her tea and continued building the organizational map from Vincent's information, and Vincent made several careful phone calls in low voices that she did not ask about, and which she understood were the beginning of something being set in motion. Something that had been stalled for 6 months by injury and isolation, and the systematic erosion of his access to the people who were loyal to him. The knock at the door when it came was 3 precise raps, a pattern. Vincent straightened. "Come in." The man who entered was in his mid-40s, broad through the shoulders, with the face of someone who had seen considerable difficulty and had developed a straightforward relationship with it. He looked at Vincent with something that was unmistakably relief, genuine, unperformed, the relief of a man who had been worried for a long time. "Boss," Marco Vitelli said. "Marco." Vincent's voice was different. She had heard him use many voices in the past 2 days, the controlled flatness, the careful engagement, the almost smile that almost happened. This was different from all of them. This was the voice of a man among people he trusted, which sounded, she realized, like a completely different person from the man she had met in the sitting room 2 days ago. Marco's eyes moved to her. Vincent said, "This is Amelia Carter. She is the reason I know what I'm about to tell you. You can trust her completely." Marco looked at her with the direct assessment-heavy gaze of a man who made rapid judgments and was usually right about them. Then he nodded once and gave her the specific nod that she understood was not a pleasantry but an acknowledgement. An acceptance. "Tell me," Marco said, turning back to Vincent. Vincent told him. She watched Marco's face as he listened, the way she had watched Vincent's face earlier, and what she saw was different, not grief and confirmation, but something hotter and more immediate. The anger of a man who has just understood that his loyalty has been circumvented and the thing he was loyal to has been endangered by someone on the inside. When Vincent finished, Marco was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The night of the shooting. Anthony told me it was the Caruso family. I went after them." His jaw was very tight. "I almost started a war with the wrong people." "I know," Vincent said. "He used me," Marco said. "He used my loyalty to you to—" He stopped. "Yes," Vincent said. The silence between them had the quality of men processing something that required no additional words. Amelia set down her notepad. "Marco, the text that was sent to my phone this morning, do you have the ability to trace the number?" Marco looked at her, then at the phone she held out. He took it, looked at the text, and his expression tightened further. "Yes," he looked at Vincent. "This is moving faster than I thought." "How fast?" Vincent asked. "Anthony has 2 meetings scheduled for this afternoon. People from outside the organization." Marco's voice was even, but something moved underneath it. "I think he's been planning a transition. And I think whoever he's meeting today, he's going to tell them it's already done." The word landed in the room. "He's going to move against you today," Amelia said. "He thinks he already has," Vincent said. His voice was very quiet. "He thinks I'm already finished. He's been thinking that for 6 months. Then he's going to be surprised," Marco said. "That's the only advantage we have," Vincent agreed. "He has planned for a broken man. He hasn't planned for—" He stopped, and Amelia saw him look briefly at the parallel bars in the corner of the room, and then at his hands, and then at her, and whatever he was thinking moved across his face in a way that she felt somewhere behind her sternum. "He hasn't planned for what?" Marco said. Vincent looked at him. "For a man who's been getting stronger," he said. The three of them looked at each other in the quiet of the room, and Amelia felt the moment settle around them. The way significant moments sometimes did, not with drama, not with noise, but with the specific weight of something that's about to tell change and knows it. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His face changed. "Anthony just entered the estate through the main gate," he said. "He has 4 men with him." "That's not his usual number," Vincent said. "No," Marco said. "It isn't." They looked at each other. Amelia Vincent's voice was very even. "I need you to do something." "Tell me," she said. "I need you to go to Rosa and Gerald and the other staff and get them to the kitchen. All of them. Tell them." He paused. "Tell them it's going to be okay, even though you don't know that yet." She looked at him steadily. "I do know that." He looked at her. "I know it because you've been getting stronger for 6 months in the dark," she said, "and he doesn't know that." "That matters." She stood. "I'll get the staff to the kitchen." She was at the door when she heard him say quietly to Marco, "Where did Gerald find her?" And Marco's answer, "I don't know, boss, but I'd keep her." She didn't stop moving, but she felt the words settle somewhere important, and she carried them with her down the hallway, toward whatever was coming next, toward Rosa and Gerald, and the rest of the people in this house who had been waiting, all of them in their different ways, for exactly this moment. Behind her, she heard Vincent say something she had never heard him say before. Not in the controlled voice, not in the careful voice, not in any of the voices he had developed for self-protection. She heard him say it in his own voice, the real one. "Let's end this," he said. And the house, which had been holding its breath for 6 months, finally exhaled. Anthony Romano walked through the front door of the Romano estate like he owned it, which in his mind he already did. He had 4 men with him, not his usual 2, which told Marco everything he needed to know about what Anthony had planned for this afternoon. 4 men was not a courtesy visit. 4 men was a statement. 4 men said, "This is already decided, and I have brought enough weight to make sure no one argues with the decision." Marco watched them enter through the security feed on Vincent's laptop. He stood with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then he said he brought Carver. Vincent looked at the screen. "Carver doesn't come to estate visits." "No," Marco said. "He doesn't. Carver was Anthony's particular solution to particular problems. He was not a man you brought to a conversation. He was a man you brought to an ending. He wasn't planning to talk," Vincent said quietly. "No," Marco agreed. "He wasn't." They looked at each other across the desk, And in that look was the entire weight of what this moment actually was not a confrontation that had been building for days, but one that had been building for 6 months, maybe longer, maybe since long before a bullet found Vincent Romano on a Tuesday evening outside a restaurant on the north side. How long until Reyes and Donovan are in position? Vincent asked. Marco checked his phone. They're already in position. East and west corridors. We have the house. He doesn't know that yet. Good, Vincent said. Let's keep it that way for as long as possible. In the kitchen, Amelia was doing the things she had told Vincent she would do, which was keeping the staff calm, which was proving to be a more complicated task than it sounded, because Rosa already knew something was happening. Rosa always knew, and the two younger kitchen staff members had picked up on Rosa's tension, and were now hovering with the specific, anxious energy of people who want very much to be told everything is fine. Sit down, Amelia said to the room in general, all of you. Please. They sat. Something is happening in the house today, she said, because she had learned long ago that people handle difficult situations better with honest information than with managed ignorance. Mr. Romano is dealing with it. There are people here who are helping him deal with it. What I need from all of you is to stay in this room, stay away from the main hallways, and stay calm. Rosa looked at her steadily. Is he safe? He's taking steps to make sure he is, Amelia said. That's the most honest answer I can give you. Rosa nodded once, the nod of a woman who has decided to trust completely or not at all, and who has made her choice. One of the younger staff, a boy who couldn't have been older than 22, who had the face of someone who had needed this job badly enough to take it, without asking too many questions, raised his hand slightly, then lowered it, then said, Is it Mr. Anthony? The kitchen went very still. Amelia looked at him. What's your name? Danny, he said. Danny, why do you ask about Mr. Anthony? Danny looked at his hands. I've seen him. On the security cameras. Late at night, going through the East Wing, looking at things he stopped. I didn't think it was my place to say anything. Amelia felt something move through her that was equal parts anger and sorrow anger at a system that had taught a 22-year-old that noticing something wrong was not his place, and sorrow at how long this had been happening while people looked at their hands and said nothing because they learned that saying something had consequences. It is your place, she said. It's always your place. What you saw matters. She held his gaze. And when this is over, you're going to tell Mr. Romano what you told me, okay? Danny looked up. Something shifted in his face, the specific shift of someone being told, for possibly the first time, that what they observed has value. Okay, he said quietly. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she now recognized as Marco's. It said, he's heading for the main sitting room. Vincent needs you there. She looked at Rosa. I have to go. Rosa stood immediately. Be careful. Always, Amelia said, and left the kitchen moving fast. The hallway outside the sitting room was not empty when she arrived, which is to say that it contained Marco, positioned to one side of the door with the specific stillness of a man who has spent a great deal of his life preparing for moments like this one. He looked at her when she appeared. He in there? She asked quietly. With Vincent, Marco said. Two of his men outside the east exit. Carver, as he paused, unaccounted for. Her stomach tightened. Unaccounted for where? That's the question, Marco said. Donovan is looking. He glanced at the sitting room door. Vincent asked me to keep you out here, and I think he's wrong, Marco said simply. I think you should go in. She looked at him. In the 12 hours she had known Marco Vitelli, she had developed a rapid and comprehensive read on him, a man of direct loyalties and no wasted words, whose assessment of a situation she trusted with the speed of a person who recognizes competence in its various forms. Why? Because Anthony doesn't know what to do with you, Marco said. He understands Vincent. He spent 40 years understanding Vincent. He has no category for you. He held her gaze. Sometimes the thing that changes a fight is the thing no one planned for. She looked at the door. She pushed it open and walked in. The sitting room had the specific quality of a space in which two men have been speaking with the careful precision of people who are each pretending the conversation is something other than what it actually is. Anthony was standing near the fireplace. She noted this, the standing, the deliberate choice of elevation. Vincent was in the wheelchair near the window, and he was doing the thing she had come to recognize as his specific form of defiance, sitting with his spine completely straight, his hands still, his entire bearing communicating that the wheelchair was a detail and not a definition. Both of them looked at her when she entered. Anthony's expression moved through surprise and then settled into something cold. This is a private conversation, Miss Carter. Mr. Romano's caregiver, she said pleasantly. It's time for his afternoon medication. I can come back in a few minutes if you'd prefer. But his pain management schedule is fairly specific. She crossed the room toward the side table where she had placed the medication earlier, moving with the complete ordinary confidence of someone doing exactly what she said she was doing and nothing else. Anthony watched her. She could feel his gaze on her back, calculating. Leave the medication and get out, he said. Anthony. Vincent's voice was quiet. She doesn't need to be here, Vincent. She stays, Vincent said. Simply, without argument, without the quality of a man inviting debate. The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds. Amelia counted them, her back still to the room, her hands steady on the medication tray. I came to discuss the organizational structure, Anthony said, and the shift in his tone was subtle, but she caught it, the decision to perform a different version of this conversation, now that the audience had changed. There are decisions that need to be made about the Chicago accounts. While you've been focused on recovery, some things have required attention. I'm sure they have, Vincent said. The Marchetti contract expires next month. The arrangement with Anthony. Vincent's voice stopped him. Sit down. I prefer to stand. I know you do, Vincent said. Sit down anyway. She turned around with the medication tray and looked at the room. Something had changed in the past 30 seconds, some shift in the balance of the space, in the specific gravity of who was holding the weight of the moment. Anthony was still standing, but he was no longer standing with the easy authority of a man who owns the room. He was standing with the tightened quality of a man who has just realized that the geometry of a situation he thought he controlled has changed without his permission. He sat. 3 nights ago, Vincent said, I reviewed the organizational accounts, the ones you've been managing since my injury. Anthony's face showed nothing. He had a good face for showing nothing, decades of practice. And the numbers don't match, Vincent said. I can explain. I know you can, Vincent said. You're very good at explaining things. You've been explaining things to me my entire life. He paused. You explained why my father's Eastern Territory accounts ran short in 2019. You explained why the DeLuca arrangement collapsed in 2021. You explained why the security team the night I was shot had been reduced to 2 men instead of the standard 6. The air in the room changed. Anthony's face remained still, but something behind his eyes moved. Vincent, you gave the order, Vincent said, quietly, without heat, which was, she understood, far more frightening than anger would have been. The man who pulled the trigger was Carlo Reyes. He's been in Miami for 6 months, which I imagine felt like a safe distance. He paused. Marco brought him back this morning. The silence that followed was absolute. Amelia stood with the medication tray and did not move and did not breathe. Anthony looked at his nephew for a long moment. And then something happened that she did not expect, something that she would think about for a long time afterward, because it reordered her understanding of how betrayal actually worked in people who had practiced it for years. Anthony Romano's face, which had held nothing and shown nothing through this entire conversation, showed something. Not remorse, not guilt, not the specific shame of being caught. What it showed was something older and more complex, and in some ways more devastating than any of those things. It showed grief, real grief. The grief of a man who had wanted something for so long that wanting it had become more real to him than the thing he was destroying to get it. You were never supposed to survive the chair, he said quietly. I want you to know the bullet was supposed to be the end of it. Quick, you wouldn't have suffered. He stopped. When you survived, I thought I could manage it. I thought the injury would be enough to, he stopped again. To take what was mine, Vincent said. It was mine first, Anthony said, and the words came out with a rawness that surprised everyone in the room, including, she thought, Anthony himself. Your father gave it to you because you were his son, not because you were better, not because you were more capable, because you were his. His jaw was tight. I built half of what you inherited. I watched you take it and never once. I know, Vincent said. Anthony stopped. I know, Vincent said again. I took what you built and I never acknowledged it. I treated you like support staff instead of what you were. He held his uncle's gaze. That's true, and it was wrong. A pause. It still doesn't give you the right to put me in this chair. The 2 men looked at each other across the distance of the room and across the distance of 40 years, and Amelia had the specific sensation of being present at something that was larger and older than anything that had happened in the past 72 hours, something that had been building since long before she arrived with her broken car and her cactus and her coffee spill. Where does this end? Anthony asked. His voice had changed. The performance was gone. That depends on you, Vincent said. Entirely on you. Anthony looked at him. You could have had Marco in here. You could have had this be a different kind of conversation. I could have, Vincent agreed. Why didn't you? Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then because 40 years ago you taught me how to drive. Because you came to my mother's funeral and you were the only one who didn't say the wrong thing. Because whatever you've done and whatever you've become, you were my family first. He paused. I wanted to give you the chance to be in a room with me and tell me the truth. Just once. Without an audience of men who would have made you perform a version of it. Anthony Romano looked at his nephew, and the performance collapsed completely. What was left underneath was an old man. Just an old man, sitting in an expensive chair in his nephew's house, with the full weight of what he had done and what he had wanted and what he had destroyed settling over him like something physical. I'm sorry, he said. And then more quietly, I don't know if that means anything. It means something, Vincent said. I don't know yet what exactly. The door behind Amelia opened. Marco entered, and with him 2 other men she recognized as Reyes and Donovan, and between them his wrists held, his face carefully neutral, was Carver, the man Anthony had brought as his ending. Anthony looked at Carver and then looked away. The 4 men at the exits have been secured, Marco said, to Vincent rather than to Anthony, which told Amelia everything about where the power in this room now lived. Clean, no one hurt. Good, Vincent said. He looked at Anthony for a long moment. You're going to tell Marco everything. The accounts, the payments, the people you brought into the organization in the past 2 years who aren't loyal to this house. All of it, he paused. And then we'll decide what happens next. Anthony looked at him. And if I don't, then the next conversation you have is with the people whose money you've been taking, Vincent said simply. And that conversation will not happen in a comfortable sitting room. Anthony absorbed this. Then he nodded. Marco stepped forward and Anthony stood, and as he stood he looked once more at his nephew, one long, complicated look that carried in it the entire history of what they had been to each other and the entire wreckage of what had happened to that history. And then he looked at Amelia. You, he said. Me, she agreed. A nurse, he said. A nurse undid 2 years of planning. Caregiver, she said. There's a distinction. Something crossed his face that might, in different circumstances, have been the beginning of a laugh. Then Marco guided him out, and the door closed, and the sitting room was quiet. Amelia stood with the medication tray she had been holding for the past 20 minutes. Her arms were slightly tired from it, which was such an ordinary physical detail in the context of what had just happened that she almost laughed. She set the tray down. She looked at Vincent. He was still in the same position, straight spine, still hands, everything about him, composed and controlled. But something had changed. She could see it clearly now, because she had spent 3 days learning to read this, and what she saw was not the flatness of the first day, or the careful management of the second, or even the clarity of the morning. What she saw was exhaustion, real exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who has been holding something enormous for a very long time and has just in the past hour been able to set part of it down. Vincent, she said. I'm fine, he said automatically. I know you are, she said. Medication anyway, he looked at her. And then slowly, with the quality of a man allowing himself to do something he has not allowed for a long time, he let out a long breath, and his shoulders dropped slightly from the architectural perfection they had maintained, and he was just a man in a chair, tired with a complicated heart. He taught me to drive, he said, more to himself than to her. I know, she said gently. She crossed the room and handed him the medication and the glass of water. It doesn't make what he did acceptable. No, and it doesn't mean the grief isn't real. He looked up at her sharply, like she had said something unexpected. The grief, he said. He was your family, she said simply. And now he isn't. That's a real loss, even when the family was the threat. She held his gaze. Grief and anger can exist at the same time. They usually do in situations like this. He looked at her for a very long moment. How do you know these things, he said. 7 years of sitting with people through the hardest days of their lives, she said. You learn. He took the medication, he drank the water. And then he set the glass down and looked at his hands and said very quietly, my father would have handled this differently. How? Without the conversation, without the room. He paused. He would have made the problem disappear and moved on. And you didn't, she said. No. Why not? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I've had 6 months in a wheelchair to think about what kind of man I actually want to be, he said finally. And I kept coming back to the same answer. He looked up. The man my father was is the reason Anthony thought he could take what he took. Because in my father's world, power meant you took what you wanted without accounting to anyone. He held her gaze. I don't want that to be my world anymore. The words sat in the room between them. Amelia sat down in the chair across from him, and the afternoon light came through the window at the angle it came at this time of day, and somewhere in the house she could hear Gerald's voice, and what sounded like it might be Marco's voice, and the ordinary sounds of a house that had been holding its breath and was beginning, slowly, to breathe again. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I rebuild," he said, carefully. "With the right people." He paused. "There are people in the organization who followed Anthony because they thought I was finished. Some of them because they had no choice. Some of them because they made a real decision." He looked at the window. "I need to know which is which. How will you figure that out?" "Marco will help. Gerald knows more than he's ever been asked to share." A pause. "And Rosa apparently has been keeping records for 2 years." The ghost of something moved across his face again, that almost smile that she had first seen this morning and which she now understood was not a small thing. On a face that had forgotten how to do it, an almost smile was enormous. "I want to do something," he said. "What?" He looked at her directly. "I want to hold a meeting here, in this house, with the people who've been in this house for years, working in it every day." He paused. "Rosa, Gerald, Danny, the others. I want to sit in a room with them," and he stopped, seeming to search for the word. "Apologize," she offered. "And yes, apologize." He looked at his hands. "I've been treating this house like a machine, like the people in it were parts of the machine." He looked up. "Rosa kept a 2-year record of theft from this organization because she was loyal to something, not to the machine, to the person." "She was loyal to you," Amelia said. "To who she believed I could be," he said quietly. "There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment. "When did you get so perceptive?" "About 45 minutes ago," he said. She laughed. It was a real laugh, sudden and unguarded, and it surprised her almost as much as the fact that he heard it. And something in his face shifted in response, not the almost smile, but the full one, arriving finally, changing his face so completely that she had a moment of looking at a different person entirely. A younger person. A person who had existed before 6 months of isolation and pain and the systematic dismantling of his own life. It lasted only a moment, but she had seen it, and she knew that she would not forget it. "Your blood pressure," she said, collecting herself, reaching for the cuff. "I want to check it. The past hour has not been low stress." "No," he agreed, extending his arm. "It hasn't." She attached the cuff and pumped it, and they sat in the ordinary comfortable silence of a caregiver doing her job, which was so familiar and so strange, in the context of the afternoon they had just lived through, that she felt it settle around her like something grounding. "Amelia," he said. She was still reading the gauge. "Hmm? When this is resolved, properly resolved, not just today, but the process of actually rebuilding what was compromised, I'd like you to stay." She finished reading the gauge, released the cuff, wrote the number down. It was lower than this morning, which was either the medication working or the specific physiological effect of setting down something you've been carrying too long. "My contract is for 3 months, she said. "I'm aware," he said. "I'm asking about after 3 months. She looked at him. He held her gaze with the steady, direct quality that she had come to understand was the truest version of him, not the controlled flatness, not the careful management, but this, the man who got on the parallel bars alone in the dark and refused to stop. "I have a cactus in my room," she said. "I know. And Doris is going to need ongoing mechanical attention. Gerald has already spoken to someone about Doris." She looked at him for a moment. "You called Gerald about my car?" "Yesterday," he said. "While you were doing the intake paperwork." She stared at him. "Why? Because you said she stalled on Michigan Avenue," he said simply. "And I didn't want her to stall again." She looked at him for a long moment. A man who had not, in all the time she had known him, asked for anything for himself, had not allowed himself to appear to need, to want, to require anything from the people around him, had made a phone call about her car. Not about the threat, not about the accounts, about Doris. "Okay," she said. "Okay, she'll stay," he said carefully. "Or okay about the car?" "Both," she said. He nodded. Once. The nod of a man who is not going to make a large thing of a moment that is in fact quite large. Marco came back 20 minutes later with Gerald and a third man she didn't recognize, and the work of the afternoon began, the real work, the careful and complicated work of dismantling what Anthony had built inside the organization over 2 years, and understanding the full shape of what had been taken. Vincent engaged with it with the specific quality she now understood as his natural state, complete, focused, utterly present, his intelligence moving through the information with the precision of a man who had spent 6 months sitting still and thinking. She stayed in the room. No one asked her to leave, and she did not offer to go. At one point, Marco looked at her across the room, over a stack of documents, and said, "You're taking notes." "Habit," she said. "Good habit," he said, and went back to his documents. Gerald caught her eye at some point in the late afternoon and gave her a look that communicated, without words, The specific satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a long time for the right day to arrive and has found that it looks more or less exactly like he hoped it would. She gave him a small nod back. Rosa brought food at 6 o'clock, which no one had asked for, but everyone ate, because Rosa understood instinctively that the people in that room had been running on adrenaline for hours and needed something ordinary and nourishing to bring them back to ground level. She set the food down and turned to leave, and Vincent said, "Rosa." She turned. "Thank you," he said. "For the 2 years." He held her gaze. "And for every year before that." Rosa looked at him for a long moment. "Your mother's soup tomorrow," she said finally. "Please," he said. She left. Danny appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, hovering with the specific hovering energy of someone who has been told they have something important to contribute and is not entirely sure they believe it. "Gerald said you wanted to talk to me," he said to Vincent. "Come in," Vincent said. "Close the door." He looked at the boy, 22 years old, probably with the face of someone who needed this job and had found in it something more complicated than he bargained for. "Gerald tells me you've been observing things on the security cameras." Danny swallowed. "I didn't want to cause trouble." "You didn't cause trouble," Vincent said. "You noticed something. That's different." He held the boy's gaze with the steadiness that was his particular quality. "Tell me what you saw." And Danny told him all of it. Every late-night thing he had seen and filed away and told himself was not his place. He talked for 9 minutes, and in those 9 minutes he provided 3 pieces of information that Marco immediately wrote down and that would, over the following weeks, prove to be significant in ways that none of them could fully anticipate yet. When he finished, Vincent said, "You should have been able to say this months ago." "I didn't know who to tell," Danny said. "You can tell me," Vincent said. "Directly, anytime." He held the boy's gaze. "That's not going to change." Danny looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone recalibrating their entire understanding of a situation they thought they had completely mapped. Then he nodded and left, and the door closed, and the room was quiet for a moment. Marco looked at Vincent. "That kid's going to be useful." "He already was," Vincent said. It was past 8, when the formal work of the afternoon finally wound down. The shape of the damage assessed, the immediate steps agreed upon, the people who needed to be contacted identified, the people who needed to be watched identified in a different way. The 3 men who had been with Marco left with the specific purposeful energy of people who have a great deal to do and are glad to finally be doing it. Gerald took a folder of documents to his office. The sitting room was quiet. Vincent was still at the desk, but the quality of his stillness had changed again. The focused, working stillness had softened into something more like the stillness of exhaustion, deep, genuine exhaustion, the kind that comes when the thing you've been braced for has finally arrived and passed. "You should sleep," Amelia said. Probably, he agreed without moving. She crossed the room and stood beside the desk and looked at him directly. "Today was yes," he said before she could finish. "It was. Are you all right?" He considered the question with the seriousness he brought to real questions. "I don't know yet," he said. "I think I will be. That might be a different thing." "It is a different thing," she said. "Both matter." He looked up at her. "The parallel bars tonight," he said. "I want to do them." She considered this. "Your body has been through significant stress today, physically," and he said, "I want to do them anyway." She looked at him for a moment. "Okay," she said, "but I'm there. Not watching from a distance, actually there." He held her gaze. "Okay." She picked up the evening medication from the tray. "Meds first, then dinner, then bars." "That's a very regimented evening," he said. "You have a very regimented caregiver," she said. He took the medication. He ate the dinner Rosa had left for him. Sitting at the desk, talking to her about nothing in particular, about the organization, about some of the people in it, about a restaurant on the north side he had gone to every Friday before the attack, about a trip to Milan he had taken 12 years ago that he had intended to be business and had turned into something else for 2 unexpected days. She told him about Doris, about her sister Carrie, about the retired mob accountant who had thrown the bedpan and later given her the best professional reference of her career, about a patient in Evanston who had spent their first month together convinced she was incompetent and their last month together teaching her how to make proper gnocchi. It was the most ordinary conversation she had had in this house. It was also, she suspected, the most ordinary conversation Vincent Romano had had in a very long time. At 10:30, she followed him to the therapy room. She stood beside him at the parallel bars, not at a distance, not giving him space, but actually there, close enough that if something went wrong she could respond, close enough that the effort was witnessed rather than private. He transferred to the bars. He moved, 1 step, 2. His arms carrying his weight with the specific power of a man who had been building it in secret for 6 months. 3 steps 4. His breathing controlled, his jaw set, his eyes fixed on the far end of the bars, with an expression that had determination in it and something else, something she had not seen on this face before today. Something that looked like purpose. 5 steps 6. 7. His body began to shake with the effort at 8. She saw it and said nothing because she had learned exactly when to speak and when the most useful thing was silence. 9. 10. He stopped. Breathe. Then slowly, with the deliberateness of a man making a decision, he took an 11th step and a 12th. He had never made 12 before. He lowered himself back into the wheelchair and sat there, breathing hard, with his hands on the armrests and his head slightly bowed, and she stood beside him and said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, 12. 12, he agreed. More than yesterday, she said. Yes, more than last week, I'm guessing. Yes. She nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He looked up at her. Every day, she said quietly. Even the days when it feels like there's no point. Every day you get on these bars and you move. And every time you move further than the day before. She held his gaze. That's not nothing, Vincent. That's what fighting looks like when no one is watching. He looked at her for a long moment. You're watching, he said. I am, she said simply. I'm watching. He said nothing, but something in his face, in the quality of the exhaustion that sat there, shifted, settled into something different from what it had been. Something that had peace in it underneath the tiredness. The specific peace of a man who has gotten through the hardest day and found that he is still here, still moving, and no longer alone in the dark. 12 steps became 14 by the end of the first week. 14 became 17 by the end of the second. Nobody made announcements about this. Nobody kept a chart on the wall or celebrated with fanfare. It was simply a number that changed quietly. Every few days, in the private accounting that existed between Amelia and Vincent, and the parallel bars and the late-night hours when the rest of the house was asleep. But Rosa knew. She always knew, because Rosa paid attention to the quality of Vincent's mornings, and his mornings had changed. The breakfast plate that used to come back to the kitchen, barely touched now, came back empty. The coffee that used to sit cooling beside him while he stared at nothing was now finished before she came to collect it. Small things. The kind of things that only matter if you've been watching long enough to know what they mean. He laughed yesterday, Rosa told Amelia one morning, in the kitchen, in the particular quiet of 5:45 that had become their time. I heard it from the hallway. I didn't even know what the sound was at first. Amelia poured her coffee and said nothing, but something in her chest did the thing it had been doing more frequently over the past 2 weeks, the warm, complicated thing that she had been carefully not naming. The organizational work was happening in parallel, the way real rebuilding always happened, not in one dramatic sweep, but in the slow, unglamorous process of examining each damaged piece and deciding what could be salvaged and what had to go. Marco was the architect of most of it, moving through the structure that Anthony had compromised with the systematic thoroughness of a man who took betrayal personally and intended to leave no evidence of it standing. Vincent directed from the estate, which was not the limitation it might have appeared to be. If anything, the past 2 weeks had demonstrated that his absence from the physical spaces of the organization had caused people to underestimate how completely he understood every part of it. Anthony had made that mistake most of all. The meeting with Anthony, the real one, the one that happened 4 days after the confrontation in the sitting room, after the initial shock had settled and the full accounting of what had been taken had been completed, was something Amelia was not present for. Vincent had not asked her to be, and she had not offered because she understood that some things needed to happen without witnesses, in the private space between two people who had to find a way to be honest with each other about something that could not be fixed, but perhaps could be, with time and difficulty, understood. She found out what happened from Gerald, who found out from Marco, who had been outside the door. Anthony had signed over complete accounting of everything he had redirected in 2 years. He had provided the names of every person he had brought into the organization with divided loyalty. He had agreed to conditions that were strict and without exceptions, in which Marco had described with characteristic economy as appropriate. He had also, at some point in the meeting, said something to Vincent that no one would ever know the full content of, because whatever passed between them in that room stayed there. But Marco said that when the door opened at the end, Vincent's face had the specific quality of a man who has closed something, not healed it, not resolved it entirely, but closed it in the way that allows you to move forward without carrying it in front of you every day. What will happen to him? Amelia had asked Gerald. Gerald had been quiet for a moment. He's being removed from everything operational. He'll live comfortably. He won't have access to anything that matters. A pause. Mr. Romano could have done significantly worse. I know, she said. That says something, Gerald said, about the kind of man he's deciding to be. She had thought about that for a long time afterward. The meeting that Vincent held with the household staff happened on a Thursday morning, 2.5 weeks after Anthony's confrontation. He had asked Gerald to arrange it, and Gerald had done so with the specific quiet efficiency that characterized everything Gerald did, gathering Rosa and Danny and the 5 other staff members who worked in the estate into the main sitting room at 10 a.m. without telling them exactly why, which meant that most of them arrived with the careful, braced quality of people who have been called into a room by someone powerful and have learned to expect that this rarely means something good. Amelia stood at the back. Vincent was at the center of the room, his wheelchair positioned so that he was at eye level with most of the people who had taken seats around him, and he looked at each of them in turn before he spoke. I owe all of you an apology, he said. No preamble, no managed introduction, just the words delivered with the directness that was his natural register when he was being real rather than performing. I've treated this household for years like a system rather than a community of people. I gave orders and expected results, and I did not ask what it cost the people delivering them. He paused. That ends now. The room was very quiet. Rosa, he looked at her. 2 years. You kept records for 2 years alone because you were trying to protect something that you believed in, even when the person at the center of it gave you no particular reason to. His voice was steady, but something underneath it was not. I am sorry it took this long for someone to deserve that loyalty. Rosa's face, which had maintained its characteristic careful composure through everything, did something complicated. Her jaw moved slightly. She nodded once. Danny. The boy looked up sharply like he still expected whatever was coming to be a reprimand. You watched and you noticed and you stayed quiet because no one had told you that your observations had value. I'm telling you now, they do. Vincent held his gaze. They helped us significantly. Danny swallowed, nodded. Vincent went through each of them. He knew their names, all of them. The ones Amelia had learned over 2 weeks and the ones she hadn't, the quiet ones who appeared in hallways and disappeared again. He said something specific to each person, something that showed he had been paying attention, maybe for longer than anyone had realized, maybe through the fog of pain and isolation, accumulating a knowledge of his own household that he had never bothered to articulate before. When he finished, the room had the quality of a space where something genuine has just happened, and everyone present knows it but hasn't yet decided how to respond. It was Rosa who moved first. She stood, straightened her apron with both hands, the gesture of a woman restoring her own composure, and said, "Your mother's soup is on the stove," which was the most Rosa possible response to an emotional moment, and which broke the specific tension of the room in a way that a longer speech never could have. Danny laughed, a short, surprised laugh, quickly controlled, but real. Gerald made the sound he made when he was suppressing something, which Amelia had come to understand was his version of genuine amusement. One of the other staff members, a woman named Patricia, who worked in the East Wing and had said approximately 6 words in Amelia's presence in 2 weeks, said about time under her breath in a tone that suggested she had been waiting to say it for years. Vincent heard it. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked back at him with the steady, unfrightened gaze of a woman who has just realized she has nothing to lose. "You're right," he said. Patricia nodded, satisfied, and left to go back to work. Amelia walked home back to her room. She corrected herself, not home, except that the word had slipped out in her own mind with a naturalness that she noted, and decided to examine later with the specific feeling of someone who has been present at something that mattered. Not because it was dramatic, because it was real. Because a man who had built walls around himself so high that the people closest to him had learned to treat those walls as permanent features of the landscape, had just quietly and without ceremony started taking them down. The call from her sister Carrie came that evening. "I need you to explain something to me," Carrie said without greeting. "Hello to you too," Amelia said. "I Googled him," Carrie said. "I Googled him, Amelia." "Okay. There are articles. I'm aware there are articles. Articles about things that are..." A pause in which Amelia could hear Carrie deciding how to frame whatever she was about to say, not exactly what you'd call ordinary. "He's not an ordinary person," Amelia said. "That's one way to pause. Are you safe?" Amelia sat on the edge of her enormous bed and thought about the question honestly. About Marco and Gerald and Rosa and Danny and 17 steps on the parallel bars. About a man who made a phone call about her car while she was filling out intake paperwork. Yes, she said, I'm safe and you're staying. I'm staying. Carrie was quiet for a moment. Is he good to you? The question was so direct and so Carrie, cutting straight to the thing that actually mattered, past all the context and complexity, that Amelia felt something catch in her throat. He's learning to be, she said. He's working at it. That's better than most people manage, Carrie said quietly. Yeah, Amelia said. It is, as turns often do on an ordinary day that gave no particular sign of being important. It was a Sunday, 5 weeks after Amelia had arrived at the Romano estate with her broken car and her cactus and her coffee spill. The organizational restructuring was well underway. Vincent's pain management protocol had been adjusted twice and was finally working properly. His pain levels consistently at a 3 or below, which had changed the quality of his days in ways that were visible to anyone paying attention. The therapy sessions had expanded longer, more demanding, producing results that his physician, Dr. Kaplan, described in their revised telehealth appointments as exceptional, which Vincent received without comment and which Amelia received with the private satisfaction of a person who knows that exceptional means he's been working in the dark for months before anyone showed up to notice. They were in the therapy room. Sunday sessions were longer because the organizational work was lighter on Sundays. And they had developed the habit of using the extra time to talk during the rest intervals, not about the organization, not about the medical details, but about the other things, the ordinary things that constituted a life. He had been telling her in fragments over several weeks about his father, not in a continuous narrative that was not how Vincent Romano told personal things, but in pieces, dropped into rest intervals between exercises, small specific memories that accumulated into something larger. Today the fragment was this: he told me once that the most dangerous thing a man could do was let someone see that he needed them, because then they had power over you. He said it while he was resting between sets, his breathing evening out, looking at the far wall rather than at her. Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you believe that?" He was quiet for a long time. "I believed it for 20 years, he said. "I ran my entire life on it." He paused. "Then I spent 6 months needing everyone around me for the most basic functions of daily life, and I discovered that the thing I had been afraid of, the power it gave other people over me, was nothing compared to the isolation of refusing to need anyone at all." She looked at him steadily. What changed? He turned his head and looked at her directly, with the clear, steady gaze that she now understood was his truest mode, not the controlled flatness of the early days, not the managed distance, but this, the real thing. "You walked into my sitting room with coffee stains and a cactus," he said, "and you weren't afraid of me, and you were angry on my behalf, and you called my physician at 9 p. because you thought I deserved better than I was getting." He paused, and it turned out that being seen by someone who wasn't afraid didn't give them power over me. He stopped, searching for the word. "Made you less alone," she said. "Yes," he said, quietly, completely. They looked at each other across the space of the therapy room, and the thing that had been living between them for 5 weeks, the thing she had been carefully not naming, that she had been treating as a professional warmth, a therapeutic connection, a natural affection between two people who had been through something significant together, was visible now to both of them in the full clarity of its actual nature. She set down her notepad. "Vincent," she said, "I need to tell you something." "Tell me," he said. "My contract ends in 3 weeks, she said, "and when it ends, I need to decide whether to renew it." She held his gaze. "And I can't make that decision clearly if I don't tell you that my feelings about this situation are no longer entirely professional." The silence that followed lasted 4 full seconds, which was long enough for her to feel the full exposure of having said it. Then he said, "I know." She blinked. "You know?" "I've known for approximately 3 weeks, he said. "I've also known that I had no right to say anything while you were still working as my caregiver, because the power dynamic is genuinely complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is. I thought about that," she said. "The power dynamic, the professional ethics, the fact that I'm literally employed to take care of you, which means that she paused, any development in another direction is ethically murky at best." "And what did you conclude?" he asked. "That we should talk about it," she said, directly, without the professional framework in the way. She looked at him. "So I'm talking about it." He looked at her for a long moment. "My contract offer," he said. "When I asked you to stay after the 3 months, that was," he paused. "I told myself it was practical." "Was it?" "No," he said simply. She looked at him. "I have lived my entire adult life," he said slowly, "choosing not to want things I couldn't control, not to need things that could be taken from me, building everything around what I could own and manage and protect. He held her gaze. And then you arrived, and you were the most unmanageable person I have ever met in my life. And somehow that was the specific thing, she said quietly. The specific thing, he agreed. She took a breath. Here's what I think should happen, she said. I think my contract runs its course professionally. I think we find you a different caregiver for the next phase, someone excellent, because your recovery still has a long way to go, and you deserve excellent. And I think that when that transition is made, and I am no longer your employee, we have a completely different conversation about this. He looked at her for a long moment. 3 weeks. 3 weeks, she said. You've waited 6 months to start rebuilding. You can wait 3 weeks. Something crossed his face, the full smile, not the ghost of it, not the almost, but the real one, the one she had first seen the night of the confrontation, and which still did the thing to her chest that she was carefully not examining too closely. Your negotiation skills, he said, are unexpectedly sophisticated for a caregiver. Caregiver, she said. The distinction matters. It does, he agreed. And the way he said it, warm, certain, with a fullness that had nothing managed about it, told her that the distinction mattered to him for the same reason it had always mattered to her. Not the title. The recognition of what she actually was and what she had actually done. They went back to the exercises. But the air in the room was different, and they both knew it, and neither of them said anything else about it that afternoon, which was the right call, because some things need to be named and then left alone to become real. The twist that Marco brought to Vincent's desk on a Tuesday morning 3 days later was the kind that arrived quietly and then expanded outward in every direction. He put a folder on the desk and said, "The Caruso family." Vincent looked at him. "What about them?" "Anthony told you it was the Carusos who ordered the hit," Marco said. "We spent 6 months thinking it was the Carusos. I almost started a war with the Carusos." "It wasn't them," Vincent said. "No," Marco agreed. "But here's the thing." He opened the folder. "While I was investigating Anthony's network, I found communication between Anthony and a Caruso lieutenant going back 18 months. Not about the hit, about territory." He paused. "Anthony was planning to give Caruso territory that belongs to us in exchange for their support during the transition of power." Vincent looked at the documents. "He was going to give away what he took from me," he said quietly. "He needed allies," Marco said. "He couldn't run this organization alone. He needed people who would recognize his authority. So he traded our territory to buy that recognition." Yes, Vincent sat with that for a moment. The additional layer of it, not just the betrayal, not just the theft, but the plan to dismantle and trade away the thing Anthony had claimed to want, piece by piece, in exchange for power he couldn't sustain on his own. He didn't want the empire, Vincent said slowly. He wanted to be acknowledged as the one who ran it. "Yes," Marco said. "That's what I think." "Those are different things," Vincent said. "Very different," Marco agreed. Vincent looked at the documents for a long time. Then he closed the folder and looked at Marco steadily. "The Caruso lieutenant. What do you know about him?" "Enough to have a conversation," Marco said. "Set it up," Vincent said. "Not a confrontation, a conversation." He paused. If they were being used by Anthony the same way he used everyone else, they deserved the chance to know that. Marco looked at him. It was a brief look, but it carried weight, the specific assessment of a man who has served someone for a long time and is continuously updating his understanding of that person. "You're going to reach out to the Carusos." "I'm going to find out the truth," Vincent said, "and then make decisions based on what it actually is, rather than what Anthony needed me to believe." He met Marco's gaze. "That's different from how I used to operate." "Yes," Marco said. "Is that a problem?" Marco looked at him for a moment. "No," he said, "it's not." He picked up the folder. "I'll make the call." He left, and Vincent sat with the folder closed under his hands, and Amelia, who had been at the side table reviewing his medication schedule and had been pretending with complete implausibility not to hear any of the preceding conversation, set down her papers and said, "That was the right call." "You think so?" "An organization built on accurate information is harder to manipulate than one built on fear and assumptions," she said. "You're removing the conditions that allowed Anthony to operate for 2 years undetected." He looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I think about everything," she said. "It's a character flaw." "It's the opposite of a character flaw," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked her papers back up and went back to the medications schedule, because 3 weeks was 3 weeks and they had agreed. And agreements mattered. The final session with Dr. Kaplan happened on a Wednesday, 2 weeks later. Kaplan had, under Amelia's persistent guidance, completely revised his approach to Vincent. As a patient speaking to him as a person with agency and intelligence, rather than a condition to be managed, including him in every decision about his care, framing progress in terms of capacity gained rather than capacity lost. The transformation in their telehealth relationship had been remarkable and had produced, according to Kaplan's own assessment, the best rehabilitation outcomes he had seen in a patient with Vincent's injury level in 15 years of practice. "I want to be honest with you," Kaplan said, looking at Vincent through the screen. "When Miss Carter first called me at 9 p.m., I'll note and told me we needed to revise the entire protocol. I thought she was overly aggressive. And now," Vincent said. "Now I think she was exactly right," Kaplan said. "Your trunk stability has improved by 40% in 6 weeks. Your pain management is effective and not compromising your cognitive function. Your upper body strength is at a level we typically expect to see at 12 to 18 months post-injury." He paused. "What you've done is not common, Mr. Romano. It required a great deal of sustained effort and a significant shift in how you engaged with your own recovery." "I had help," Vincent said. Kaplan looked at him. Then he looked briefly off-screen in the direction that suggested he was looking at wherever Amelia was standing. "Yes," he said, "you did." After the call ended, Vincent sat quietly for a moment. Then he said, without looking at her, "How many days left on the contract?" "4," she said. "And you found a replacement?" "Gerald found 3 candidates. They're excellent. I've reviewed their files." She paused. "I'll be available for transition briefings as long as needed." "Transition briefings," he repeated. "Professional terminology," she said. He looked at her then. "Is there a version of the next conversation that you're nervous about?" The directness of the question caught her off guard, which was unusual for Amelia Carter, and which she was not sure she appreciated, because it meant he had been paying attention to her in the same way she had been paying attention to him, carefully, completely, cataloging the things that other people's quickness caused them to miss. "Maybe," she said. "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because in 3 years of difficult cases, I have never crossed any of these lines. Not once. And I need to know that I'm crossing them because they should be crossed and not because." She paused. "Because," he said. "Because this place got into my head," she said. "Because you're a compelling person and the situation was extreme. And sometimes those two things together produce feelings that look like something real, but are actually just..." She stopped. "Amelia," he said. She looked at him. "Do you remember the morning of the confrontation?" he said. "When Anthony had 4 men and Carver was unaccounted for. Marco offered you a way out," he said. "Car, a driver. Gone before anything started." She stared at him. "Marco didn't. Before you came to the therapy room," he said, "Marco found you in the kitchen. He told me." His eyes were steady and completely clear. "He gave you the option to leave. Safely. And you said no." She was quiet. "You said no because of me," he said. "Not because of the situation. Not because of the job. Because you were not willing to leave me alone with what was coming." He held her gaze. "I don't think that's a feeling produced by extreme circumstances. I think that's something real." She looked at him for a long moment. "Marco told you," she said finally. "Last week," he said. "I asked him directly. He told me. And you've been waiting 4 days to say something. You had a rule," he said. 3 weeks. I respected it." She stared at him. He looked back at her with that expression, the full, real one, the one without management or performance, the one that had taken 5 weeks to emerge fully, but had been visible and outlined from almost the beginning, from the moment she spilled coffee on him, and he looked at her with bewilderment instead of anger. "You have 4 days left on the contract," he said. "I'm aware," she said. And then she looked at him for a long moment. At the man who had learned to drive with his uncle on a Sunday afternoon 40 years ago. At the man who got on parallel bars alone in the dark and refused to stop. At the man who called her physician at 9 p.m. because she was in unnecessary pain and someone needed to be angry about that. At the man who asked an 18-year-old household staff member what he had seen on a security camera and actually listened to the answer. At the man who was slowly and with difficulty and with full awareness of what it cost him, deciding to become someone new. And then she said, "We have a completely different conversation." "I'll be ready," he said. "I know you will," she said. The last 4 days of the contract were ordinary days, therapy and medication and organizational updates, and Rose's cooking and Gerald's quiet competence and Danny's growing confidence. The replacement caregiver, a woman named Patricia Chen, who was sharp and experienced and had the specific quality of someone who would absolutely not tolerate being dismissed, came for a 2-day transition briefing. Amelia walked her through everything: the medication protocol, the therapy schedule, the pain management approach, the 17 things she had learned about Vincent Romano that weren't in any medical file, but that made the difference between adequate care and real care. Patricia Chen listened to all of it with the attentiveness of a professional who understood that the briefing she was receiving was unusually thorough and unusually valuable. "You're not actually leaving," Patricia said on the second day. It was not a question. Amelia looked at her. "The contract ends tomorrow." "That's not what I said," Patricia said. Amelia considered denying it. Then she decided that Patricia Chen was the wrong person to attempt to mislead. "The professional relationship ends tomorrow," she said carefully. Patricia looked at her for a moment with the specific expression of a woman who has been around long enough to recognize a situation when she sees one. "He's going to be difficult," she said, "to work with. In the beginning." "He was difficult at the beginning," Amelia agreed. "He's actually quite good now." "What changed?" Amelia thought about it honestly. "He decided he wanted to," she said. "That's the only thing that ever actually changes anything, whether the person decides they want to." Patricia nodded slowly. "I've seen that in 20 years. The ones who decide they're completely different patients." "He's going to push back on the therapy," Amelia said. "When it's a hard day and his body isn't cooperating, he goes quiet and cold. Don't take the quiet personally. Just keep showing up." "Noted," Patricia said. "And the parallel bars at night, he does them alone sometimes. Don't stop him. Just make sure he's not compensating on the left shoulder. I'll watch for it." "And Rosa makes his mother's soup when he's had a particularly hard day," Amelia said. "It helps. Don't ask why, just does." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "You care about him very much," she said. "Not a judgment, a statement." "Yes," Amelia said simply. "Good," Patricia said. "That's the thing, isn't it? The thing that makes the difference." The last morning of the contract, Amelia was in the kitchen at 5:45, as she had been every morning for 6 weeks. Rosa was already there. Neither of them said anything for a few minutes, in the comfortable silence that 6 weeks of 5:45 mornings creates. Then Rosa said, "Will you come for Sunday lunch?" Amelia looked at her. "Not kind," Rosa said. "Practical. He eats better when you're here." She turned back to the stove. "Sunday at 1. I'll make the soup." Amelia felt something catch in her throat. "I'll be here," she said. She went to Vincent's suite at 6 a. For the last professional time, he was awake as always. He was at his desk, which had become his morning position: coffee, documents, the beginning of the day's work, the posture of a man fully present in his own life. He looked at her when she entered and did not say anything about the contract ending. She did not say anything about it either. She ran through the morning assessment: blood pressure, pain levels, medication, with the same thoroughness she brought to every session, because the thoroughness was the point. The thoroughness was what she was and what she had always been, and the fact that it was the last professional morning did not change what the morning required of her. "Pain levels," she said. 2. She wrote it down. "Sleep better," he said. "Actually better." "Good." She finished the notes and closed her pad. She looked at him steadily. He looked back at her. "Patricia Chen is excellent," she said. "You're going to try to intimidate her." "I'm not." "You're going to try. It won't work. She's been doing this for 20 years and she has your number already." Amelia held his gaze. "Be honest with her about the pain levels. Don't skip the medication when you think you can manage without it. Do the left shoulder correction exercises. You've been avoiding them because they're boring. They're the most important ones." "I know," he said. "I know you know," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." He looked at her for a long moment. "Amelia." "Yes?" "Rosa mentioned, 'I'll be here at 1, she said. And before that," he said, "there's no reason we couldn't have a conversation before Sunday." She looked at him. "It's 6 a.m. on a Thursday." "I'm aware of the time," he said. "I'm asking if you'd have dinner with me tonight. Not as my caregiver. Not as part of any professional arrangement. Just dinner." She held his gaze and felt somewhere in the middle of her chest the specific warmth of something that had been careful and patient and controlled for 6 weeks, finally being allowed to simply be what it was. "Yes," she said. "I'd have dinner with you tonight." He nodded once. The nod of a man who had learned, with considerable difficulty and no small amount of pain, that some things were worth asking for. She picked up her bag. She adjusted the strap. She looked at the desk and at the parallel bars in the corner of the room and at the man who had made 12 steps when she was counting and 17 when she stopped, who had gotten up every night in the dark and refused to accept that the dark was permanent. "I'll see you tonight," she said. "You will," he said. She walked to the door and opened it, and she was stepping through when he said, "Amelia." She turned. "Thank you," he said, "for staying." She looked at him for one last moment in the morning light, this man who had been a king and became a patient and was now slowly, carefully, with everything it cost him, becoming something truer than either a person who had learned to let someone stay. "You're welcome," she said. And she meant it the way she meant everything, completely. Without performance, with the full weight of someone who understood exactly what had been survived and exactly what it had cost and exactly what it was worth. She stepped into the hallway and closed the door behind her, and she stood for a moment in the quiet of the Romano estate, this house that had held its breath for 6 months and was finally, room by room, beginning to breathe, and she let herself feel all of it. The 6 weeks, the parallel bars, the soup, the confrontation, the almost smile that became a real one, the text at 2 a.m. that had frightened her and changed everything. The moment Marco said keep her, and she had kept walking, because some things you carry and don't name until you're ready. She felt all of it, and then she took a breath, and she walked down the hallway toward the stairs and the kitchen and Rose's coffee and whatever came next. Behind the closed door, she heard the sound of Vincent Romano beginning his day. The sound was nothing remarkable. Papers, a phone call, the quiet, deliberate movements of a man at a desk, present in his own life, engaged with his own work, no longer retreating into the silence that had been his only company for 6 months. It was the most ordinary sound in the world. It was also, to Amelia Carter, the most beautiful thing she had ever heard, because she knew what it had cost to get there, and she knew what it meant, and she knew, with the certainty of a person who has learned to trust her own perception of things that matter, that it was only the beginning. Vincent Romano did not get his life back. He built a better one. And the woman who arrived 29 minutes late with a broken car, a cactus, and coffee on her hands was exactly the person he needed to show him how. Some people enter your life like a storm and leave you changed before you even understood what was happening. Amelia Carter arrived like a rainy Thursday morning, inconvenient, unimpressive, impossible to ignore. And she stayed. That was always going to be enough.